Thank you for joining us today, Jon. We're here today with Jon Rubinstein. It's August 14th, 2019. Jon, we're so happy to have you here today. You've been a friend of the museums for many years, and thank you for sitting with us today.
Hey, it's my pleasure. My history with the museum goes back. Dan and I were talking about this at dinner. So I don't think he realized how far the museum goes back, because I got here in the Valley in '86, and Gordon used to drag me over here to, like, not here, but to Moffett Field to like haul boxes around when they'd get shipments from the Boston Computer Museum out to here. So that must have been in, '87 or '88, something like that.
I think that was more around '96. Is that possible? That because I started in '96.
No.
And really?
Yeah, no.
Okay.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, maybe I'm confused. I got to the Valley in '86.
Okay.
That I'm sure of.
Yeah.
And I worked at Ardent. It was my first job.
Right.
So, that was from '86 to '90, something like that. And '87, maybe it was '86 to '90. And I'm pretty sure that in that time frame, we were hauling stuff around over there. So,
Okay, well, we can come back to that.
yeah, it'd be interesting to find out.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's start at the beginning. Tell us about where you were born, what your parents did, and did they shape the way you looked at the world?
So I was born in New York City. I was born and started off on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. And then when I was a little kid, we moved to the Lower West Side of Manhattan. My mom was interesting history. She's Israeli, and my dad had been over in Israel, sort of helping out before the war. My mom was like a nursing corps second lieutenant in the military. And also a member of the Stern Gang. So she was sort of doing lots of different things while they were trying to get their independence. And so they got married and came to the United States. And then a few years later, I was born. So
What year would that have been?
I was born in '56.
Okay.
Right. So the war was in '48. So I think they wandered around Europe for a couple of years trying to get a visa. And then once she came to the U.S., I was born a couple years later. So she was a nurse originally. She worked as a nurse, in the hospitals in New York, and my dad was an engineer, had a chemical engineering company, basically. She started going back to school and ended up becoming a sociologist, and ended up teaching at the Fashion Institute of Technology for 50-something years, teaching the sociology of fashions. My dad started a business, and it was doing electroplating, sort of brush plating for repair of aircraft engines, or cylinders on any kind of cylinder where the tolerances have to be tight, or later on electronics, printed circuit boards repair, that kind of thing. And so I grew up in an environment where my mother was at school, going to school all the time, because when she came to the U.S. she didn't really even have a high school degree. So she lied to NYU to get in to do her undergraduate. Because she'd gone to high school, or hadn't gone to high school in Jerusalem, and because of the war, the records had been all destroyed during the war, and so it couldn't be proven one way or the other. So she just told them she had a high school degree, and they accepted her at NYU, and then she went on to Rutgers to get her PhD, and so she was in school a lot, and my dad was doing his company, he was traveling a lot. And so I grew up initially on around 19th Street and First, Second Avenue. I had a couple of aunts from Israel come over to take care of me when I was a little kid. I went to public school. I think it was PS 40, which was across the street. That was kind of my first couple years. When I got a little bit older, around first or second grade, we moved to the Lower West Side, 26th Street and 9th Avenue, and I went to PS 33, so I continued public school, from very little kid, I sent you that Dilbert video. That was me, right? I was, 2 years old, I was taking shit apart.
The knack.
I got the knack, right? And it took till 6 or 8 or whatever to put stuff back together, but I had the knack. So
that's great.
Went to public school through elementary school. Did 1 year at the local public school for junior high school or whatever it was. Intermediate. It was intermediate school, and that place was a disaster. The New York school system was bad anyway, but that place was really awful. And so my parents decided to send me to private school, and I applied to a variety of places. I don't really remember any of this, but I know it's what happened. And so for junior in high school, I ended up going to Horace Mann, which was a fancy private school in the Bronx that you'd have to take the train an hour each way. Now they have buses for the kids, but in those days you took the subway. And so I took the subway, up there and back every day.
Can I ask, did you have a lot of spare time? Like, you were an only child, is that right?
I was not an only child.
Oh, you're not an only child?
I am not only. I have a brother.
Okay, can you tell us a bit about your siblings then?
My brother is, I have a younger brother and a younger sister. The sister's the youngest. My brother is also an engineer, but mostly he's a doctor. So he did his MD, PhD in bioengineering, and now runs the Blodell Hearing Institute at the University of Washington Medical School, and he does cochlear implants. He's one of the world's leading cochlear implant guys. So he did his PhD in nerve response to electronics and ended up doing cochlear implants. So he's he helps people hear again. It's really remarkable to watch the videos of people being able to hear all of a sudden. And of course, it's a lot of digital, digital stuff. They implant the electrodes, and then they stimulate the electrodes with using digital signal processing, and so it's a constant software evolution and improving the algorithms to.
We're going to get to this later, but
okay.
I wanted to, specifically the iPod ecosystem. But what do you think about, as you're speaking with this, I'm reminded of hearing aids now are Wi-Fi enabled, and you can actually control them.
I think Bluetooth,
Bluetooth
enabled.
Bluetooth.
Yeah. In the old days, they had plug-in things, so you could actually plug your iPod into the hearing aid.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
Yeah,
but so we'll get to that later. But it's interesting that what the two Rubinstein brothers did as kind of
and my sister's useless, so she grew up as basically useless and continues to be useless. So
oh dear. Okay.
She's got nothing to talk about her. But in any case, my brother is he's done a great job, and so in any case, that's.
Tell us about Horace Mann. So we'll just step back to where we were, and what that was like. It was for you, and did they encourage science and that kind of thing, or more?
They really
arts?
didn't.
Yeah,
they really didn't. And in those, Horace Mann's very different today. And I was honored to get an Alumni of the Year award a couple of years ago, and I went back and visited. I hadn't been in many years, and the school is completely different now. It's got great science programs, robotics programs, it's co-ed. It was all boys when I went. It was a strange place when I was a kid, and this was the late '60s, early '70s, because I graduated high school in '74. So the world was going through a dramatic change. Horace Mann was in those days sort of following the British system of molding young men, right? And there were a group of us that were not particularly moldable, including me, and so it was a difficult experience, and they didn't really encourage science per se. We had no computers, which seems today to be ridiculous. how could a high school not have any computers? But there was nothing on the technology side. I got involved in the theater because that was the closest you could get involved with technology, and not on the acting side of things, but on the technology side. So I did, set construction of sets. I did lighting, lighting design, lighting for shows. For my senior project, I redesigned the sound system for the theater. So we threw away all that really old stuff, and me and my best friend at the time, took this on as a project to completely rebuild the sound system for the theater.
That's a pretty serious project.
It was a really serious
for
project.
some high school students.
And it was great. I mean,
wow.
For one, I didn't have to go to class, which was the best part, right? But I learned a lot, right? So I mean, you learned about basic project management. You learned about procurement because we bought a lot of shit, right? And we bought a lot of wire and amplifiers and all kinds of audio equipment and speakers and we did all the wiring. I mean, it's not like you went and hired an AV guy like you would today. We did all the wiring ourselves. All the in those days it was a minimal amount of programming, but all the programming, and so it was a full project start to finish. So it really gave me a good sort of idea of what it takes to do a project from beginning to end. I don't think the school actually intended for me to get quite as much experience out of it as I did, but we went way overboard. And I was very good friends with the teacher who ran the theater, and he kind of gave us an open checkbook, and so we kind of went wild. And the stuff we did lasted for over 30 years. I mean, they basically
amazing.
tore out the whole theater, in I don't know, 10, 15 years ago. But when they tore out the theater and rebuilt it, I mean, literally a whole new building and everything. It's beautiful today. The stuff that we had done was still there and operational all those years later. And it was easy for anyone to debug because we did such a good job on the wiring, and everything was really clear and labeled. I mean, all the things you'd expect from a high-end audio kind of job. And yeah, we did that as 17-year-olds, in
Okay, so I have to ask, how did you get from a kid to be? How did you acquire the skills to do that as a?
I had the knack, right?
As a kid.
So as a 6 or 8 year old or whatever, I started doing heat kits and that kind of stuff. I about 7 years ago, 8 years ago, I took up golf, right? And I'm terrible at it, right? And it's very frustrating. And some of my friends who I play with have children who are really, really good. 14 years old, and they're fabulous. And I'm like, well, how do you get to be so well? How do you get to be so good? And they go, well, I went to golf camp this summer. And I'm thinking to myself, golf camp? I didn't get to go to golf camp. I had to go to science camp. And I went to the Dalton science program in the summers. I did that. I worked as a bike mechanic for a bunch of years. Right, and I mean, basically from the time I was probably 14, I was working as a bike mechanic in the summers. Right, and I learned how to do bike mechanics at American youth hostels. They had a training program, right? So I don't know, I was probably 13 years old. I went to the training program. I did a cross-country trip with them. So we went from New York to Portland, Oregon on bikes. It started off with 12. We ended up with probably 8, but it was a great trip.
How old were you when you did that?
Probably 14.
Wow.
And my wife goes, who in their right mind would let a 14-year-old go? I mean, we had, no cell phones. We had no sag wagon. Yeah. It was us and, and two people to keep an eye on us, and they were, I don't know, 18 or 19 or something, right? Interestingly enough, they still run, it's not American Youth Hostels anymore, but they still run that trip. It's a little fancier than it used to be, but it's still, you're kind of on your own. It was great. But so in any case, I learned to be a bike mechanic. I worked in bike shops, various bike shops in Manhattan. Every during the year and during the summers and stuff. I rode a lot. I mean, that was my big thing. Is I really liked to ride bikes in those days, and so so that was sort of the mechanical side of things. And the electronics, sort of came from doing heat kits and reading stuff and. The audio was trying stuff out, and we had Radio Shack and the Radio Shack equivalents in the neighborhood. We had there was a lumber yard like 4 blocks away that's still there. But I walked by it the other day. I was over at Peloton, visiting the guys there, and 2 blocks. Their office is like 4 or 5 blocks from the apartment I grew up in, and the lumber yard that I used to go buy wood from, still there after all these years. Amazing. So I don't know. I just kind of picked it up. And then hanging around the theater, I got to do lighting, and I got to do audio, and it just sort of came natural. No computers yet, though.
So one thing that some professors of engineering have noted is that in electrical engineering that I've spoken with said, when we admit people who were hobbyists to the program,
Yeah.
they actually seem to do slightly worse than than people who have no background. Now, this is as a general rule.
No, it could be. It could be.
And this could be possibly because they're overconfident, was the suggestion. But did you find your knowledge to be helpful when you went through engineering, maybe in the final years more
yes
on the practical
and no.
side? Or?
Yes. I mean, I would probably agree with that a little bit. So I did theater all through high school, right? Or not all through, but the last couple of years of high school I did theater. I did summer stock theater after high school, and I was technical director of a summer stock theater, so that kind of encompassed everything. In upstate New York, I did that, and so I got to Cornell, and so my first thing was, I'll go hang out at the theater, and I went to the theater, and the theater was not interested in some engineer, some rowdy-looking engineer hanging out there, right? So they kind of rejected me, and so I had to find something else that sort of intrigued me, and I ended up hanging out at the radio station, right, which kind of filled in the need for doing like tech stuff, and so through a lot of my college years, I worked at WVBR, and again not on the air, but as one of the techies, and so that was really fun. As far as school went, so I mean, my first year was a disaster. Right? I mean, my first semester, I got like 4 D's and an A. Got A in computer science. I got 4 D's, math, physics, chemistry, whatever. I mean, all those other things, because it wasn't interesting. So I don't think it was overconfidence. It was that I wasn't stimulated, right? And because I was already kind of beyond.
That's a more sensible.
I mean, I have to say
actually.
that there's probably a bunch of stuff I didn't learn when didn't learn well enough at Cornell in those intro classes. But I don't really use them today, right? I mean, there's a lot of math that
yes, you never use. Again.
Now, today today I hang out at a quant hedge fund in New York, and we'll get to that later. But those guys use. I mean, I look at the math they use, and it's like. And I'm a pretty good engineer, and I have a really good math background, and it's like way over my head, from anything. So yeah, I mean, I would agree with that, right? And the first couple years at Cornell were bumpy for me because it was all kind of background stuff. So as long as I was doing computer science or circuit design, those type of things, it was great. And interestingly, I did really well at Einsteinian physics, quantum physics. For some reason, that just kind of clicked. Newtonian physics, not so much. Who knows, right? It's weird, right? It's however your brain works. But once I got through the introductory stuff, the first 2 years, then it just kind of, it was a rocket ship for me. I got to absorb so much stuff, and taking computer architecture classes. And electronics classes, and digital signal processing classes, and all those. I mean, it was just great. But I hadn't seen my first computer till first semester freshman year, where I took Computer Science 101. Okay. It was.
What year would this have been?
1970. I graduated high school in 74, so went to Cornell in 74. 74, 75 was my first freshman year there. And the computer thing just like it was love at first sight.
What computer was this? A mainframe?
Well, it was a 370, right? And you know, we wrote in PLC, right?
I don't know that one.
Yeah, it's a long time ago. You know, it was a Cornell version of PL1. All right, was PLC, and so we started off in PLC, and then when you got into the heavy shit, you basically ran on a 360 emulator, did assembly language on a 360 emulator. I mean, that was
The emulator was running on the 370?
was running on the 370. Yeah, so
Okay.
everything was punch cards,
Right.
and you know, and printed outputs, right? And whatever it was, it just clicked, right? And you know, that really, so I took a lot of, you know, those kind of courses, you know, obviously digital design, but, you know, in those days we had to take motors and power systems and all that stuff. So, I mean, I have had a full labs and background in big motors and switches, you know, these big nice switches and stuff. And
Yeah.
I mean, it was interesting. Again, not something that, you know, ever used again, but, a little bit different. I don't think they have that requirement anymore. But engineering was tough at Cornell. It was a hard program. It was a really hard program. So, you know, the first couple of years I struggled with it. And then I kind of hit my stride, and it was, you know, easy from there. When I was going to graduate from college, I didn't feel like I wanted to go work yet. And so the easiest thing was just matriculate straight into a graduate program. And so I decided to do the Masters of Engineering program, which is a one-year program. And you know, I stayed in Ithaca because I was working there at the time. I was working at one of the first computer lands. So I had, I don't know, it was probably junior year maybe, I had taken a course on city planning. I know that sounds weird, but the cool part about it was it ran in a simulation that had been done by, you know, I forget which government agency. You know, it was you know, probably, you know, it was an environmental response to you know, what happens in a city, right? And so it had a full simulation of a city with, you know, you got mayors, you got real estate developers, you got all the different aspects of a city, and we'd meet as a class once a week, and we'd put our inputs in for that simulation. It was a big batch simulation that ran. It was a big simulation. And I mean, not compared to today, but in those days it was big, right? I mean, it would take, you know, a day or something running on a, you know, on a 370 to finish or whatever. So,
wow, is that like SimCity today? In a way?
No, it was long before that.
No, I know it's long
Yeah, it
before
was a similar
that,
kind of thing.
But is it? It's a
same
simulation.
kind of thing, except that it was more focused towards environmental, you know, sort of what happens to the environment around a city when you do various different things, right? Because it was written by that part of the government. But it was a great class. And it was really fun because, you know, you really got to learn about simulation and how that all worked. And I think I was a real estate developer, and, you know, it was really fun. But the big thing was the woman who ran it. Her husband was one of the senior IT guys at Cornell, and together they opened this computer land. It was one of the first computer lands in the U.S. and I was one of their first employees. All right, so
how old would you have been? 21?
No, not even. I graduated when I was 20, so I would have been, you know, 19 or 20 at the time.
Okay, so hold on there. You graduated at 20. That's not normal. What happened?
I was 17 when I went to college. No, I never skipped. I was just sort of October baby, and just timing worked out.
That explains 1 year, but not 2. Anyway, yes, that's good.
I think I was 17, 18, 19.
That's
yeah,
pretty young to
when
graduate.
I graduated.
20.
Yeah, because I didn't.
Anyway.
Undergraduate. I mean, I was 21 when I graduated graduate school.
Okay.
But
so you started at Computerland?
Yeah, I started working part-time at Computerland, which was great. So we had, you know, in those days it was IMSI 8080s and Krememkos. I mean, you got a bunch of the stuff downstairs, right, or at least in the warehouse, and Apple IIs. Right? And so I started off as the guy who actually was in the back room assembling this stuff, because it came all as kits. Didn't come. The Apple II came pre-assembled, but everything else came as kits.
And people who walked into Computerland were not interested. They were not hobbyists. They didn't want kits. They wanted
mostly it was sold for business.
They wanted a solution.
They wanted a business solution, right? And particularly the Krememkos were sold. IMSIs were more sold as a hobbyist thing, but the Krememkos were sold as a business solution, and they had basic, you know, sort of inventory kind of packages and stuff like that on it. I mean, it was very primitive. It was very primitive. I mean, to boot an IMSI 8080, you have to toggle in the, the
I
boot
know.
sequence, right? I mean,
Were you out on the floor or sort of in the back?
well, I started in the back building this
Yeah.
stuff, and I'd assemble it all, and then I'd repair it when it broke, and I'd repair Apple IIs, and I think Woz screwed up the keyboard chip or something, or didn't do something because the keyboard chip would always die. It was up on a second board above. It was too hot. I don't remember what the problem was, but that was like the biggest failure mode.
How did you learn to fix Apple IIs or anything for
Just
that?
had schematics.
For that matter.
You just had schematics.
Just work your way through
You
it.
work your way through it, yeah.
Okay.
Right. I mean, you have a scope and
Yeah.
analyzer and
No special reference material or.
No, they didn't have any of that in those days.
Troubleshooting
Yeah, you just had to figure,
guides.
You
or
just had to
anything?
figure it out.
Okay.
Yeah, you just had to figure it out.
Thank you.
So I worked there, and then I ended up on the sales floor as well, selling computers, and so for the last couple of years I was at Cornell. I worked there, summers and weekends and nights and that type of thing, and I absolutely loved it. It was great, right? Because I was working with real computers, not this big mainframe thing that was hidden. Of course, by then we'd gotten TI Silent 700 terminals and stuff for the 370, so you could actually do stuff at home, and I did my master's thesis in computer-controlled adaptive filtering. So I had smaller computers to work with there, what was in effect microprocessors. We had PDP-8s and stuff like that. All those smaller systems that were old, but. I did a lot of what I did on the personal computers. I mean, it was pre-personal computer, but what at the time were hobbyist computers or.
So did your work on the computer spill over into your graduate work at all?
Yeah,
You're
because I used the same stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, I did my
Right.
adaptive filtering work on an IMSI 8080.
Right, and can you just tell us a bit more about what that's for? Is that a form of signal processing or?
Yeah.
And how would you use that?
Well, it's. You remember the TI Speak and Spell?
Yeah.
The TI Speak and Spell was the first product that used a TI DSP to basically do voice synthesis, right? And the work I was doing was kind of the precursor to that, and that product came out shortly after I graduated, I think, or right around the time I graduated. But I remember looking at it and going, wow, this is really cool because they basically integrated all the stuff I was doing. But it was a digital signal processor that would have adaptive filtering, and so you could use it for a variety of things. Speech was one, creating human speech was one. But I was funded by a DARPA grant, and it was for low frequency communications with submarines. Right, was what they wanted it for. And my professor and my advisor was both at Cornell, and he worked, I think he was a TRW, was visiting professor or whatever at TRW, and because they were on the same. I mean, I remember visiting them, and they were on the same government contract that my DARPA grant was on. So, but basically pre-DSP work. I mean, it was all CCD bucket brigades with feedback loops, and you tap off each tap of the CCD, and you'd adjust the, with A to D converters or whatever, you would adjust the feedback of the, from the whole loop, and the computer would do this all real time and monitor the output and adjust all the coordinates and parameters and stuff real time.
What was the mix? Like, were you kind of unique in using a personal / microcomputer for your graduate work as opposed to other students who may have went to the mainframe?
Yeah, I can't, I mean, most people use the PDP-8.
Oh, PDP-8.
PDP-8 or
Okay.
11. I guess we got an 11 sometime in there.
So your
Towards
department
the end
had
of it.
some minis of it?
Yeah, we had a bunch of minis. Most people did stuff on the minis.
Okay.
Yeah, I was pretty unusual in that, I think. I was big into the sort of hobbyist computer movement at the time, right? So that was really good, and so yeah.
Okay, moving on. Any major events, either in your life or in the world at large, that influenced you
At that time?
At that time.
Well, I mean, the world was going through a dramatic transition. I mean, I got to Horace Mann, we were wearing coats and ties, right? And you know, we were, you know, future leaders of America kind of stuff, right? And you know, a year or two later, out went the coats and ties. By the way, we used to leave the coats and the ties at the school, right? Because you get beat up on the subway if you wore a coat and tie. So you know, and a lot of times people left their shirts in school too. So you can imagine how bad everyone smelled after a couple of months of wearing the same clothes every day. But a year or so in, they got rid of that. I mean, the world was changing. I mean, the Vietnam War had a dramatic impact. You know, it was you know, the United States was going through dramatic changes. The whole hippie movement and all that really had an impact on it. I mean, I went to, you know, communist summer camp when I was a kid, like when I was a little kid and stuff. You know, it was you know, it was very socialist or communist or whatever. Right. Very peace, love, and Woodstock kind of place. And so, you know, that all had a tremendous effect on me. And I think it's one of the reasons that Steve and I resonated, Jobs and I resonated so well when we first met, was we kind of had a similar, I actually finished my education, but we had a similar background from you know, from that kind of perspective of having those years impact us. And so that had a huge impact. And I think, you know, from a high school point of view, the you know, my theater professor had a huge impact. I mean, he was just great, and he was not only my teacher, but he was my friend, and we remained friends for many years after, you know, until he unfortunately passed away, you know, a bunch of years later. But he had a really big impact, but the times were really changing, right? And you know, the civil rights movement was going on, the you know, the getting out of Vietnam, you know, and I was sort of, you know, when I graduated from high school, I was at the very tail end of, you know, the draft had just ended, and I mean, you know, that stuff was scary.
Lucky
you. You know, yeah.
Did the space program have any impact?
Of course.
Tell us how that affected.
Well, I mean,
you
know, watching people, you know, land on the moon and you know, circle the Earth and all that stuff, and the tremendous focus on scientists and engineers, you know, really legitimized that as a path. I mean, I'd always wanted to be an engineer. I just didn't know what it really meant. I mean, intuitively inside, right? But to see what they were accomplishing, the white shirt thing didn't grab me. But you know, but it's interesting because if I'd been born, you know, I don't know, 5 years earlier. Right. I mean, today I'd be working at IBM wearing a white shirt and pocket protector, right? So it was, you know, it was really, you know, 5 or 10 years earlier it would have been completely different. Yes. So, you know, it was very much a product of the times, right? And you know, there's that book about, you know, the Malcolm Gladwell's book about the timing of everything, and you know, I mean, Steve, you know, Jobs and Gates, and I mean, those guys are a year or two older than I am, but we all kind of came through, you know, at the same time, you know, through the same period of both upheaval in society and the technology shift that was going on. So it was a great opportunity.
A couple of related questions related to television programs.
Star Trek. First season.
You took the words out of my mouth. Star Trek and Mr. Wizard. Mm-hmm. Did either of those impact you? And
Star Trek.
If so, how?
I mean, I was like a Trekkie, like just glued to it, right? I would never, I mean, I watched the first season, I would never have missed an episode. It was so, I mean, so eye-opening, right? And I mean, still is today. I mean, if you look at a lot of the products, you know, the precursor came out of Star Trek, right? And I remember talking to the guy who used to run the T. Rowe Price Technology Fund, and I'm like, well, you know, what's your major investment thesis, right? And he goes, if I saw it in Star Trek, I invest in it. I mean, I'm serious, right? I mean, and he was sort of serious, right? So, and he's done very well, and so it's a good investment strategy. But yeah, no, Star Trek, absolutely. Mad Scientist Club, great book. It is out of print, but you can find copies of it because I bought a copy recently. for someone. And you know, it was a book about, you know, a bunch of high school kids doing science stuff, doing cool science stuff, and it was really fun. You know, big impact on that. And you know, and look, you know, I also had my dad's factory. I mean, in those days, his factory was in Manhattan, off of Union Square, in an old industrial building, which is now all condos. I'm not sure I'd want to live in one of those condos because they used, you know, arsenic and all kinds of other poisons were just poured down the drain in those days, and you know, scary stuff. But you know, it was a big chemistry lab basically because it was all chemicals and laboratories and stuff like that. So I got to, I mean, that was kind of my playground. Yeah.
Well, that's great. So just moving on here, we've actually managed to scoot through a bunch of questions, which is great.
I mean, my bedroom when I was a little kid was a disaster, right? Because I had a workbench.
Tell us about that.
Well, I mean, you know, it was like no other room. I mean, I had a workbench. I had all kinds of equipment on it. I had all kinds of tools, and you know, there was a little room for my bed, but most of it was, you know, places to work. I had hooks hanging in. I mean, I grew up in an apartment on the 21st floor of an apartment building in Manhattan, right? So, you know, it was a small apartment, and my brother and I shared a room, but I'd kind of half the room. I built a divider, so I had my own space, and you know, I had hooks hanging from the ceiling to hang bicycles from, so I could, you know, work on the bicycles, and I had workbench with all my, you know, electronic stuff and other tools, and you know, for working on bikes, and I mean, it was mostly a workshop with the beds kind of in the corner of it.
That's great. All right, let's see. Okay, Colorado, I guess, would that be the logical next step when you went there?
Well, it was interesting because I didn't want to graduate, you know, undergraduate, so I went to graduate school, and when I got done with graduate school, the program there, I was ready to go to work. So I interviewed at probably 10 companies. It was interesting, and you know, it ran up the usual suspects, right? Intel, and it was interesting because when I got to Intel, the interview questions were about their development systems. Right? This wasn't the microprocessor group. This was the group that built the systems you use for actually doing development. And
the Intellect, I think it was
yeah,
called.
I forget what they were called, but yeah, the old development systems. And so we were going through the schematics as part of the interview process, and like, you know, I mean, this stuff. I mean, I've been doing this for a couple of years already, right? You know, these small computers, and you know, based on Intel processors and other processors and stuff. And so we're going through, you know, so I'm going through the schematics, like this. And I get this one page, and I go, I have no idea what this is, right? And everyone around the room looks at it, and they all kind of look at each other and go, well, we don't know either, right? So there was some circuit in there that had on, you know, one page that nobody knew. But so I blew through a whole bunch of interviews, and I got a bunch of job offers, but you know, I really wanted to build personal computers. This is pre the PC industry, but you know, small computers that people could use. And I ended up in Fort Collins, Colorado, at interviewing at Hewlett-Packard at their personal systems. It wasn't called personal systems. It was called the workstation division. I forget what it was called in those days, but it changed names a few times. But basically, it was their engineering workstation division, and working on the lower end, you know, engineering workstations. And so I got to Fort Collins, you know, having grown up in Manhattan, I get off the plane and, you know, you're in Colorado and it's like, oh my God, this place is so gorgeous. And you know, Fort Collins was probably 40,000 people at the time. Mostly, I mean, there was three things there. There was the university, Colorado State. There was a company that made gyroscopes for you know, military stuff, and Woodward Governor, and you know, so they had tons of high-end machinists doing these things, and then there was Hewlett-Packard's you know, systems division there, their workstation division, and that was kind of it there, and you know, but I got there and it was like, this is it. I'm going to go build small computers. And so I accepted the job offer there, and turned down, you know, everybody else, and flew to Fort Collins and started working there. When I got to Fort Collins, the first project I was on was actually doing software for networking stacks, and I'm like, I don't want to do networking stack software. I came to build computers. right? I mean, maybe I came to the wrong place. And I got, I got other, I mean, I could call, DEC or Intel or, one of these other companies up and say, hey, I changed my mind, can I come? And I'm sure they would take me if you guys, want me to do this stuff. So basically I threatened to quit. I mean, in a nice way. Yeah. And they went, no, look, we'll get something else. How about you go down to production engineering for a little while, and then we'll find the right place for you, right? To when a spot opens up on one of the computer design groups. And I'm like, well, I don't love the idea, but okay, I'll go do that. Best move I ever made. So I moved down. So in those days in Fort Collins, the second floor was engineering, and the first floor was the factory, and we made computers. Right? I mean, not the raw PC board. That was done in Boise, Idaho. In HP's facility in Boise, they actually fabbed the PC board, but we got the raw PC boards and we loaded the parts, and we had production lines, and we'd assemble the stuff and ship it from there. I mean, it was amazing.
Do you remember any model numbers?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I worked on the So when I got there, they were just releasing the 9826.
And that is a workstation.
That was a workstation.
Right.
Yeah. A small screen, dual floppy, keyboard, attached workstation. Yeah. And I came back to engineering and I did the 9836. And then I did the HP 9000 Series 300 and Series 300. I think it was 310, 320. I forget. But there was that whole series of workstations that I did when I was there. But in production, I was doing, some of the earlier products just before that. So it was 9845, some of the early 9835, 45, 9825 series.
By the way, the first time we met was you coming over to the warehouse with a bunch
of these. Yeah, and I brought a whole bunch. Yeah, because I had a bunch of that stuff I bought it.
That was great.
HP used to sell.
Yeah.
Like twice a year, they get rid of excess inventory
or
old things, right? And
wow.
they'd have a big sale in the parking lot, and you could buy whatever you wanted.
Really?
Yeah.
Just for employees?
Yeah, for employees. Right?
Wow.
Now, what they didn't know is we had a gray market between all the divisions, right? And so anything you wanted, you could basically trade for. Right. So, we had computers, so we were constantly building up computers. And instrument division had scopes and all that kind of stuff, and then there was the guys doing digital analyzers, and they had their stuff, and so we would all trade. So there was a going rate, for each of these things, and we'd all trade for stuff, and you basically stick them on a Greyhound bus to ship them. All right, and you ship them to the other division, and they would ship you whatever product you wanted, and this was for all of our home use. So we all had, I mean,
really
I was there 7 years. We had really nice home labs. Yeah, really nice home labs. So in any case, so I spent almost sort of a year, 11 months, 3 days, 4 hours, 2 minutes in production. I mean, I loved it and hated it. All right, and I ran the auto test group, and so that was a time when HP was developing production line test equipment, right? So at that time I think it was like the DTS 70 or something, and these were bed and nails testers, right? And you'd put the PC board on the tester, and the vacuum would suck it down onto the fixture, and then it would test both analog and digital on it, and they just started shipping these out of Loveland. And so I took over the group, and so I had, I was right out of college, and I had a bunch of people working for me. So I had both test technicians on the line, and I had programmers, right, working for me. And
how many people would you say?
I don't know, it's a dozen people or something like that.
Is this kind of your first serious
management
role?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right, and so we did. We ran this test group, and then we were an alpha site for the HP 3060 tester, which was their next generation one, which was very well done, right? And so basically we programmed this thing to test all the different boards that in manufacturing. So I learned so much about manufacturing, because I was part of the production engineering team, and having spent almost 2 years there, I learned all the things not to do. It made me so much of a better designer. It was really a phenomenal experience that I never would have chosen to do on my own.
Can you give us one example of how that made you a better designer?
Well, you learn all the things that don't work, right? I mean, because people make mistakes, and you know, or how to prevent, you know, how to prevent failures, right? So you know, at the time HP was just getting into the you know, the whole quality, you know, how to improve quality of products, right? And you know, things that now we all kind of just, you know, are natural. It's, you know, doing statistical quality control and all that. And, you know, a lot of stuff that came from Japan, right? HP was just starting to adopt that and adopting some of it from the military, right? You know, and so you know, we learn about all of that stuff there. I mean, they had very good training, and we were also doing a lot of research into what works and what doesn't work, because you know, we could build 50 systems and put, you know, 15 in 3 different environments and keep 5 out of the environment completely, and be able to run you know, a broad set of tests, because it wasn't like today where, you know, you plug the last part in and an hour later it goes out of the factory, right? I mean, it would take us a long time to build these things, and we had lots of test time, and, you know, we would test for days and days before they would ship, you know, in ovens and all that kind of stuff, right? So, you know.
Did you learn things that you later used
At
Apple?
Absolutely.
Next,
I mean, you bet.
everywhere.
Absolutely. You know, a lot of the stuff that I learned about developing processes of how to develop both how to develop products and how to ship products, I got the foundations from, you know, learning at HP, and HP was lifting it off of, you know, Xerox PARC and you know, some of the military stuff that was going on at the time, and it was really interesting. It was an interesting time to be there. So this was sort of 79 through 86. Right, and it was a very formative time in the computer industry for learning how to do mass production. I mean, not mass production how we think of today, because we would build 25,000 systems a year, but, you know, it was no longer handcrafted one at a time kind of products. It was, we had production lines, we had, you know, we had automatic testing capability, we had burn-in facilities, we had, you know, we had all of that, and how to optimize that. You know, does it make sense to burn in for an hour, a day, a week? You know, where does the curve fall off? And you know, when I got there, we were doing all of our, well, so in any case, after the year and 11 months and, you know, a couple of days or whatever, I went back to engineering, and then I was working on a project, and that was the 9836, which was a 68,000 base workstation. And, you know, in those days we would lay out PC boards by hand.
Yes.
Right, using tape and stuff. It was ridiculous.
Tell me, how big was the team that worked on that machine? Were you the architect or the designer?
No, I was doing one of the subsystems, right?
How did you contribute?
I was doing one of the subsystems.
Okay.
I was doing the floppy subsystem. It was dual floppy, and so I was doing the floppy subsystem. But I got involved in the whole thing, and I quickly evolved into being, you know, one of the lead architects for the you know, the low end workstation, all the 68, you know, the commercial microprocessor workstation group, versus the other building had the team that was doing all of the you know, HP developed processors and the products based on that. I forget the name of the processor, but then that ended up being HPPA and all of that. But I ended up being the architect of the workstation, of the commercial microprocessor workstations, which were all based on 68K family stuff.
What's the single most important decision a computer architect can make?
Balance.
Can you explain that a bit for us?
Yeah, you need to make sure that all the subsystems are balanced. Like we'll get into this a little bit later, but one of the big mistakes we made at Ardent was we had blazing, you know, fast integer, scalar. We had blazing fast, you know, floating point vector, and we screwed up the you know, the scalar floating point, right? And it was a big hole, right? You can screw up bandwidth to memory. You can screw up bandwidth to I/O subsystems. I mean, so you need to have balance in a system, right? And you know, to make sure it all just kind of flows.
I don't know if you knew this, but that is also the answer Seymour Cray gave. So just to let you know.
Love Seymour Cray.
Pretty good. Okay, Hewlett-Packard.
That's really an honor, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
That I gave him the
well,
that I
you
gave
should
him.
be honored.
No, I mean that's like awesome. But that's what it's about. It's all about balance, and Seymour was really good at that, right? And the funny thing, I always told the team about Seymour, and I never knew him personally, but obviously I'd read about him and I'd watched some videos and stuff about him and things, right? But I think I met him once personally here, but the thing is that everyone saw Cray as like, he was this genius who would, like, the computer would just pop out of his head, and that was kind of it. And what people didn't understand is that he would, like, kind of jot something on a piece of paper and he'd hand it through a little window, and on the other side there was like 1,000 guys who were busy like doing the actual circuit designs for everything to make it all work and stuff. And so the lesson from there is that there is no one creative genius that can make everything work. These systems are much too complicated for any one person to hold the whole thing in their head. They have to have a team. It has to be built from subsystems up, and that's especially true today, given the massive complexity. It was true when I was younger doing this stuff, but it's especially true today, that given the massive size of things, that you can hold an awful lot in your head, but you can't hold it all in your head.
We struggle with this when we do when we nominate our fellows, because everything is by team now.
Right.
So it seems almost unfair to pick out one or two people.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's a challenge for us. All right. So can we wrap up Hewlett-Packard?
Oh no, so much stuff about HP that was cool.
Tell us
so
about
much
HP.
stuff. So I mean, we were really the leaders in workstations, right? And
competitors were DEC?
Sorry?
Who were your competitors?
Well, it was kind of funny. I mean, there was sort of towards the end there was Apollo, right, which HP ended up buying. I mean, clearly there was DEC, but they never got down to the small computer. I mean, they sort of did, but not really very well, because they were really hung up on mini computers, right? Because what's his name was a mini computer guy. And Ken Olsen. I mean, I got the honor of meeting Ken much later in his life, and he wasn't really all there anymore, right? And he was still like, PC thing is just a fad, and he still hadn't got the fact. This was when he was at his startup that he did after he got booted out of DEC, right? And he still hadn't gotten the fact that the world had changed. Right.
There was an interview that we did with Bob Supnick, who do you know that guy?
Sure, I know Bob.
Where he reflects upon showing, I think it was the VAX 9000 and an Alpha. He says, they're basically similar. And Ken said, I just can't get my head around this.
Right.
And that was essentially the problem.
Right, that was the problem. And that's what killed DEC.
Yeah.
Right, that was what killed DEC. So, but we were building really cool stuff. And I was the first one to ship the 68020, right? And I got to be very close with the Motorola guys during that whole process. And I got a My Way award because they wanted to ship at 12 megahertz. This really dates us, right? And I wanted to ship at 16, right? And I forced them to bin the parts so I could get enough 16s to ship my workstations at 16. So I still have that plaque from the Motorola guys. But
is that their sort of euphemistic way of saying thanks for giving us a kick?
Yeah, sort of. But they just added another level of sort on the fab, and it worked out. But that was really good. It was a transition time in software as well, because we started with HP Basic, I think, right? And by the time I left, I mean, things were all Pascal based or Unix based. And so it was a dramatic shift in the whole software front. There was a shift in expectations, right? I mean, when I got there, if a computer crashed every now and then, it was okay, right? When I left, I mean, we'd have computers running for 6 months, 9 months, and not failing, right? So I remember spending months, maybe a year, doing memory testing, right, to figure out. How did we build reliable memory subsystems, right? Because you had particles coming from the sky that would, disrupt the bits inside the memories, and, we looked at all kinds of error correction and all that kind of stuff to build in our future systems, and, how bad was it really? Because no one really knew. how long a memory system would actually be reliable for.
It had never been characterized.
Never really been characterized. So
Right.
and we had infinite resources, right? Because our margins were 60% margins. I mean, yeah, it was crazy, right? I mean, it was a whole different time, right? So, and projects took, 3 years. I mean, I was really lucky. I put out, several products during my 7 years at HP. A lot of the guys I work with had never put out anything in 7 years. And our primary competition wasn't DEC or it was another division at HP. Right? It was really stupid. It was too bad because HP was a great company in those days. It was a great company. Unfortunately, it lost its way over the years, but it was a great company. I was very grateful for the education I got because I got a really good education there on processes, on reliability, on manufacturing, on how to design products. And while I was there, I took a course a semester at Colorado State University and got another master's degree in computer science.
So I was just going to ask, yes, first about that, but also were there seminars and courses?
Yeah, all kinds of
internal
stuff.
to
And management
HP?
courses, and
Right.
it's interesting because I didn't really want to be a manager. I mean, I did it in production, but that was kind of different. When I got back to engineering, I wanted to be an architect, right? And so I became sort of the lead architect for the lab, for our lab, and but they kept wanting to be a manager because the logical evolution was you'd move up into management, and I'm like, no, I don't want to be a manager. I want to be an architect, but I want to learn about management. So they'd send me to lots of management classes. They had really good management classes in those days, and so I would take management classes. I was continuing my schooling, at Colorado State. I felt bad for the other students at Colorado State because we had, the HP people and then the regular students, and there was this bimodal distribution on scoring, right? And we would have this competition of like who could score 100% on everything throughout the year, right? Which would, drive the other students crazy because they thought we all cheated, all right? But we cheated in some ways because
We worked together, probably.
no,
right?
we didn't actually, but
No?
we had computers. Right?
Oh,
I mean,
okay.
I had a workstation at home. I had the most advanced, personal computer in the world sitting on my desk at home.
That is a bit unfair.
Right?
Yeah.
And so if we're writing an operating system,
Right.
I'm like I can compile everything,
All your
order of magnitude faster. They're
All your
busy.
stuff works too.
And they were working on, I don't know, it was a Cyber 70 mainframe or something.
Yeah.
It was a horrible thing, which was great for running Lisp or Snowball or stuff like that. But no relation at all to doing stuff in, I guess we were doing Pascal at the time. But no relationship or machine language. Debugging and all that stuff. It was so much easier having your own computer right there. So. Not being on some old batch system. So yeah, we did have an advantage from that point of view.
Why did you go back for another master's? You felt a need for more skills, or?
Yeah, look, to me, building computers is about system design, right? And what I realized is that I'm really a system designer. And so to build systems, you got to know about the software and the hardware. And I knew a lot. I'd already taken some operating system courses and stuff at Cornell as part of my graduate school. So I had and I'd taken lots of computer science during that time. But I started taking at Colorado State. I was taking sort of compilers and more advanced operating system stuff and formal language theory and those kind of classes. And I did my master's thesis on RISC computing, right, which was sort of coming in vogue, right?
Great timing.
And yeah, it was good timing.
What was your topic, your thesis? Do you remember?
I think it was "Keep It Simple, Stupid." Right, was the title of it.
What does that mean?
just
I'll have to look it up. Maybe it's on the web.
It was, it was, no, I don't think it would be on the web.
Yeah.
So it was just about the transition from CISC to RISC that was going on, and
Like a market analysis, or?
No, it was about the
Technical.
technology, the technology, the deep in the pipelines and stuff, and
Okay.
and the comparison of the two.
Right.
And because
So like architectural arguments for why RISC might be superior to.
right.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. But remember, there weren't any RISC machines yet, right? This stuff was under development still. Right. It was just sort of happening at that point. MIPS had just kind of gotten going around there. There'd been a bunch of, the 801 had been done at IBM. You know, there'd been other research, I think, at Berkeley and stuff, but you know, in Stanford, but the, you know, I don't think MIPS had come out, or it was just coming out at the time or something. I forget, but it was, you know, all around the same time.
And
So-
HP also had the PA risk too.
Well, that's right.
So
yeah.
was that about this time or
Yeah, you
later?
know, before I left HP, no, it was at that time. So before I left HP, I'd been going back and forth between the workstation division and HP Labs, working on what was called Spectrum at the time, which became HPPA, right? And there was an architectural committee, actually several architectural committees, but trying to basically develop, you know, the processor, the buses, the you know, the entire sort of system architecture so that it was scalable across the needs of many divisions. You can only imagine what a nightmare this thing was, right? And so we'd have these meetings at HP Labs, and you know, and then you'd have a bunch of different divisions all going, I need this, and you know, you gotta.
Do you remember if there was like a vast performance range that was required?
Huge performance range.
100 to 1
Yeah,
or
you know,
something like that?
I mean, the buses were dramatically different. I mean, you know, the range of performance on it, the processors. So I was working with HP Labs on their low-end processor at the time. I forget what it was called, but it was basically their entry-level processor, and then you know, around that time, I'm trying to remember, but because I'm confusing two time periods, but because I got in, you know, sort of involved with HP a little bit later on as well, aside from going to work there much later, but I'll get back to that in a bit. But no, so there's lots of stuff going on with Spectrum, HPPA. I was going back and forth on the corporate jet from Fort Collins to San Jose, you know, and hanging out at the labs and, you know, there, and you know, so I was very involved in that. I was very involved with the future 68K architectures, working with Motorola.
Oh, really? You fed back into
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Motorola's
Yeah, yeah,
design team?
Yeah, absolutely.
Really?
Yeah.
Can you think of an example where the thinking
Nah,
went?
not really.
But you remember?
I mean, we were building systems, so we gave them lots of feedback on how to
Okay.
do a better job of building processors to fit in the systems and stuff.
Right, and they listened to you because
Yeah,
you were
and,
HP.
And look, we
so-
were the first. You know, we would typically have the first bring up of their chip in a system.
Oh, really?
You know, oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah,
No
yeah.
wonder they liked you.
Yeah, no. I mean, like I remember because when we did the I wasn't on the team, but when they did the first 68,000, you know, they went from 6,800 to 68,000. We got the first 68,000 chip in our lab outside of Motorola, right? And the guy who was doing the project, I won't mention any names because frankly I don't remember his name, but he plugged it in backwards and blew up the chip. But I did all the 68,010 and 20 bring ups. Right, and which I did not plug the chip in backwards, and you know, so we basically were the, you know, the you know, sort of the extension of Motorola that was actually building systems to bring up their early chips. But we, you know, continued that relationship. It was great. I loved HP, and my big issue with HP at the time was they just wouldn't move fast enough. Right, they were very plodding, and you know, and there was always infighting between the divisions. And because of that, everything got slowed down. And so they had incredible technology, and they had incredible people. I mean, the labs was filled with really smart people, and you know, it was you know, Bill Worley was there, and I forget the guy who ran it. I see him at the opera here occasionally, but he was great. And they had a bunch of great architects. I mean, you know, Ruby Lee, Howard Lee, you know, were busy working on all this, and or at least Ruby was.
Yeah, she did PA risk.
She did.
too,
Yeah,
right?
she was one of the lead people in PA. But it was really smart people. Carnasius, not Dean, but the other one. You know, who'd been on the 801 project with Worley. I mean, those, you know. Trying to remember all the names so long ago, but I mean, it was great people, a bunch of IBMers, a bunch of HPers, you know, lifetime HPers, and really smart group of people, and it was really fun, and you know, we were doing great work. I mean, I got to bring the first DAISY PC layout systems into HP, right? So I scanned about who we should buy, and I picked Daisy, and I bought some Daisy systems to do our project. So we did the first sort of computer laid out PC boards.
I think at this time it was called the DMV, the Daisy Mentor Valid.
That's right.
Those
it
were
was
the
the
three.
three. That's
Yeah.
exactly right. Yeah, yeah. So we did the first Daisy systems in HP. You picked that over Mentor and Valid. And then it's interesting because the history goes forward, and I had a lot to do with both Valid and Mentor going forward. But we chose Daisy that first time, and the stuff worked great, and we used that. I remember taking the introduction to semiconductor, the Conway Mead book.
Oh yes. the
Right, so we had
VLSI.
the VLSI book. I took that class. We had that class internally at HP, and I built a chip that got fabbed over.
A Moses or
Yeah, I forget where it got fabbed. It was probably out here in Santa Clara or something at the HP fab. But I mean that was all again doing tape and stuff.
tape on Mylar.
Exactly.
I did some of that.
Yeah. So
Very slow
but,
going. It's after 4 layers.
It's hard.
It's
It's
pretty
really
well-
hard. But you learn
it's
like a
very
lot of the
difficult.
fundamentals. So later on, when you're doing this stuff by computer, and you're doing 8 to 10 layer PC boards, you've learned, you got the basics down in your head of how it all kind of works.
I think people that do layout now are basically need
Push the button.
PhDs because of the RF.
Well, that's a whole different
everything.
thing. That's
is-
all analog at
it's,
that point.
It's all RF
analog.
and
Yeah.
analog now.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, it's
Really
it's
complicated.
complicated now. But so HP was a great environment. I learned a lot, and I just got frustrated because we just weren't moving fast enough. Right, and I wanted to work in a smaller environment, and so I started thinking about what to do next.
we were at HP. You were looking around for.
Yeah, I started looking
things to
around what I
do.
want to do next. So I was sort of tangling with management because I didn't think they were managing the place right, and I was driving them nuts. They were driving me nuts, and so I was hanging out with the Motorola guys, and we decided to start a company. Right, and so we kind of got a group of guys from HP and a group of guys from Motorola, and we started a company called Soulborn. Actually, it was called CGC originally, which was Cool Guy Computer. Right, and in parallel, I had been interviewing for I've been out there looking for other jobs because I wanted to do a startup, and I wanted to do an early stage computer startup, and so, but the primary effort, we spent probably about 6 months. Dave Mothersole, who was one of the chief architects on the 6020, had gone to Kyoto to go to school. His wife was Japanese, and so he went to get his PhD at Kyoto University. And he got to know the guys at Mitsubishi, Mitsubishi really well. And so they wanted to big time get in the computer business. So they invited me to come over and talk to them about helping them get in the computer business. And I was like, okay, I'd never been to Japan. I'd never been to Japan before. So I fly over to Japan and go to Osaka, and I meet with Mitsubishi, and I meet with the senior people there, and they take me through their 20-year computer plan, and I'm like, oh my God. Because you can't have a 20-year computer plan, right?
No.
And they have like baby steps, to get going, and then eventually they're going to build a mainframe, and I'm like, this is like so crazy.
Wow.
And
They're
so
sort of recapitulating the history of computing.
that's exactly what they were doing. That's how it happened. So that's how we're going to do, and we're just going to recreate it, right? And so I went back to Dave's place in Kyoto and Doug's place in Kyoto. So the two guys who ran the 6020 was Dave Mothersole and Doug McGregor. So I went back to Doug's place in Kyoto, and we kind of brainstormed, and we said, well, why don't we do our own company, like when you graduate? And he goes, awesome, let's do that. So we cooked up this idea that basically we were gonna clone the 68,000 family in 6020 or further generation, and build a workstation on top of that. Right, and we'd get Mitsubishi to fund us, and that's what we would do, right? And I was still interviewing for other jobs, and Mitsubishi offered me a job which I turned down, and I'd been interviewing out in Silicon Valley for jobs and stuff, and so, any case, we assemble a core team, we write the business plan. We go back to Mitsubishi. We go, look, I don't want to work. I tell them I don't want to work for you, but would you fund us? And they went, surprisingly, they went, yes. Right? And because they liked Doug a lot and they liked me a lot, and so they did. And so then I kind of assembled a group of people to go do this, and we sort of did a vote, and I wanted to move to California, everyone else wanted to stay in Colorado. All right, the Texas people wanted to come to Colorado, the Colorado people wanted to stay in Colorado. So I decided to accept a job at Ardent, and it was about the time that Machusta sent the money, right? And I kind of disappeared out of it. So they continued on, they built the company. About 3 nanoseconds after the guys left Motorola sued them. So they switched to Spark. Right? They got a license from Sun, sort of. They built Spark clones, and they built clones.
Ross Hyperspark, that thing.
Yeah, I don't
remember.
No, I don't remember.
No, that one.
No, I didn't know that. But
Okay.
they basically built a chip. They built a chip that was a Spark processor, and then they built a workstation around it, and they were selling workstations, and they were actually doing okay. They had a great team in Longmont, Colorado, and anytime they'd get into like a real deal where there'd be a significant number of products, Scott McNeely would fly in and kill the deal, right? And would basically give away, Spark workstations, Sun workstations, and so they never really got traction.
And this was Solborn.
This was Solborn Computer.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we have one in the collection.
yeah. No, it was a great product.
Amazing.
And a really smart group of people who did it. I mean, I assembled the first 10, but they really hired great people. And they were in Longmont, Colorado, and they kind of did their thing. I decided I didn't want to do that. And it was disappointing because I liked the guys a lot, and I liked our project, and I would love to have started a company from scratch. I mean, I had started a company from scratch, right? But I wasn't going to stay. So I left, and I joined Ardent, which at the time was Dana Computer. Right, and I came out for the interview, and I interviewed with a bunch of people, and they say, well, we'd really like to have you. I mean, I was probably employee number 16 or something. They go, we'd really like to have you join the team, and they give me a written offer on the spot, and they go, you should take this, and then they roll in Gordon Bell, and I'm like, whoa, Gordon. I mean, because Gordon was, a god of computer architecture. He'd written the book, and ran DEC, and I mean. And here comes Gordon, right? And so that was the first time I met Gordon.
Oh, okay.
Right, and so he kind of told me all about why I should do this and why it's a great job and everything. And then the CEO Alan Michaels comes in, and Alan was a character. He was this old Intel sales guy, and he'd been CEO of Convergent Technologies, and he was just a character. And he goes, let me see the offer they gave you. And he looks at the offer, he goes, that's not enough. And he crosses out and puts in new numbers and stuff. And, okay, you should sign this now. And I'm like, no, I'll sign it tomorrow. So, but the next day I did sign it and joined them. And I turned in.
By the way, do you think that whole thing was a
Of course it was a setup.
Was a setup?
Nah, it was Alan's shtick. But he had a great shtick. He had a bunch of those.
So he did that on purpose.
He did it on purpose. Yeah. That was his whole shtick. But I don't know. It was 1986. I was 30 years. Not even 30 yet, right when I joined. Right.
Still making your way.
I was still trying to figure all this stuff out. And
Right.
in HP, HP was a pretty naive place, compared to other, the rest of the world, right? So we lived in a bubble, right? The HP bubble, and so this was a good education. So I joined this crazy company, Data & Computer, and with a crazy CEO, a crazy head of engineering, Gordon wandering around, and a bunch of really, really, really off the chart smart people, right? And we were building, something that no one ever done before.
Who brought that company together?
Alan did. Alan Michaels.
He
yeah.
did. Oh, okay.
Yeah. He left. I think he kind of got booted out of Convergent.
Okay.
They took the CEO spot away from him, and
Right.
Oh, yeah. And
did he hire Gordon, and then Gordon hired the engineers?
Ben basically hired all the engineers. Ben Wegbright. And,
Okay.
and Ben had been a Convergent with him. Ben had been a professor at Harvard, I think. If you want to hear good Ben stories, ask Steve Blank about it. The first time I met Steve Blank was when I got there, it was quite a cast of characters. It was quite a cast of characters, and we were building something that no one had done before. Right?
Which was a high performance.
High performance, high density. Using the first generation of high density CMOS gate arrays. I think they were gate. I don't think they were ASICs yet.
But I think, is this what they called a graphic supercomputer?
This was a graphic supercomputer,
which is a kind of a new product category.
It was a whole new product category.
Yeah.
It was combined. So it basically took, a fraction of a Cray and a silicon graphics display terminal and put them together. Right. And there was two companies doing it. It turned out there was us, Dana Computer at the time, and then there was Stellar in Boston, which was a spin out of Apollo. I think it was the CEO of Apollo started it when he sold Apollo to HP. I don't remember, but at some point in time, they started it over there. And so we had two teams, one here, one in Boston, doing basically the same product, different architectures.
Different companies, though.
Different
right?
companies, different architectures,
Yeah.
same product. Right? Started it at like the same minute. Right, and there's some history as to whether one stole the idea from the other, or who stole the idea from who, whatever. But we had these two companies.
Interesting.
And I came in as the CPU designer, right? And
was there an enabling technology that
CMOS
that allowed this
high density CMOS is what allowed it.
That allowed this new product category to come into
occur.
fruition.
Absolutely right. Yeah.
Okay.
So we were doing CMOS gate arrays. I did one ECHL gate array, but we were doing LSI Logic's 10K family at the time. That was like we were one of the first ones to do chips in that. We were the first to use Verilog. We were the first to use Synopsys. We had a lot of firsts. We were first to do parallelizing compilers. We were first to do some of the graphics libraries we did. Dore, I think it was called, was and we had a group of really, really smart people. So I don't know, I was employee 16 or something like that, so I packed up and drove straight to California, went right to work.
And they were in Sunnyvale.
They were in Sunnyvale.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Right next to where the Palm offices were when I was at Palm. So it's kind of funny. But yeah, just down here in Sunnyvale, and that was a wild place.
Yeah. Tell us about that.
Well, we worked 24/7. Right. I mean, it was insane, and we were doing stuff that no one had ever done before, and it was really cool. And we built really great products. Great products. We used the MIPS processor, so we were the first ones to use the MIPS processor outside of MIPS. In the first generation product, we did not use the MIPS floating point processor, which we should have on the second generation product. We did, but we built basically multi quad vector engines and using the latest chips doing floating point, and I forget who they were from, but.
And at this point, CMOS has overtaken ECL and other bipolar technologies.
Yes, and all this stuff was enabled. So we were, using, I did an ASIC out of ECL for bus control that was done by the company that got bought by Brooktree eventually. I forget the name of it, but it was in San Diego. We did all this stuff here at LSI.
Gallium arsenide is completely out
not in the picture.
Way out of the
not
picture,
in the picture,
right?
Yeah. And so the goal was something that was sort of refrigerator sized, $100,000, and had sort of a significant fraction of a Cray, and the display capability, which was all done in software instead of having a special purpose engine in the display. You just used a regular display, and you did all the software on the on the product, and it was a great product. It was really fun to design and build, and I did all the processes for how you design products and how you take them into production, and because we had nothing when we got started, so we got to leverage off stuff I'd done at HP. We got to leverage off stuff from DEC, and built the processes, built the tools. and we wrote a lot of the tools ourselves.
Machines were actually built here in Sunnyvale?
Yeah.
Physically built?
Physically built, yeah.
Not offshore? Or
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
All built here. PC boards were all done here.
What would a typical customer, who would a typical customer?
Well, that was the problem. We didn't have any customers, right? So,
okay.
I mean, look, we sold some to the government,
Okay.
right? For the military kind of, kind of CIA doing satellite imaging. We sold some to medical research because you could do brain brain slices of scans and stuff like that. But what happened was we basically woke up SGI, right? And Forrest Basket had just joined them and it interviewed with us first. We knew what we were doing, and then he went over to SGI, and before you know it, SGI came out with a competing product, and they had sort of account control because all of our customers were using SGI terminals, right? And displays. So they kind of kicked our butt, right? And both us and Stellar, and plus we had Stellar and us both trying to get the business, and so we're both undercutting each other. And you could have sold more computers or made more money by standing on the corner of Palo Alto and giving these things away, right? So it was not a successful company, but the product was very forward-thinking and multi-processor, multi-vector, compilers that handle that all for you, high-performance graphics subsystems. I mean, it was really, big memory subsystems with lots, error correction and all of that, high-performance buses. I mean, we really pushed the envelope on
Really,
a lot of stuff.
There really were some supercomputing features
Exactly.
to the architecture.
Yes.
Yeah.
It was a small mini. It was a small mini. It was a personal supercomputer, and I did an article in IEEE Spectrum called "Personal Supercomputing,"
Oh, okay.
right?
But you mentioned 24/7 days.
Oh,
and
it was great.
And I can see that you mentioned Verilog and Synopsys and having to write compilers, and all of those things have huge learning curves.
Oh, huge!
Like no wonder
We did all of it.
No wonder you were like
We
any
did
one of
all
those.
it.
Yeah.
I mean, I was doing this Echo. It was probably 3,000 gates or something, right? And it was a clever design. I have to pat myself on the back because it was a very clever design. And so I went to go run the tools on it to run test vectors, and their test vector tools sucked. All right, and so you got 80% coverage or something, right? So I just kind of rolled up my sleeves and spent 3 days sort of nonstop, Coke and Wendy's chicken sandwiches, and off the Sunnyvale Wendy's, right? And 3 days straight, manually doing vectors for this thing, right? Till I got 99% fault coverage on it, right? And I mean, we did all kinds of stuff like that. It was nuts, right? But it was so much fun. Really enjoyed it.
Just brute force.
Just made it happen.
Slogging through things.
Yeah.
Wow.
And it was a great system, and our chips worked. The simulation really worked, and I mean we had some bugs, but we worked around them, and the only problem is that we couldn't sell any.
So tell me about Stardent and Ardent. They got together, didn't they?
Well, yeah.
Stellar and
Ardent. We were killing each other,
right?
Because we're both giving away products, and our system was better. I'm biased, but our system was better. I think we did better. We ran all the impact benchmarks and all that kind of stuff, and we did better. And they were very different architectures, so the two CEOs got together and decided to merge the two companies. Terrible idea, because you have two different cultures. We hated each other to start with. I mean, every week we'd have a beer bust, and Alan Michaels, the CEO, would come in and he'd put up a chart of last week, the cars in the parking lot on nights and weekends at both companies, right? And they'd always be beating us, so we'd have to go. We have to work harder. We got to work harder. Right. Years later, I asked Alan, Alan, where'd you get the data for the cars in the parking lot at Stellar? He goes, I just made it up. It was the funniest thing.
That's a well-known VC data source, though, isn't it? I think.
That's
The cars in the parking lot at
Yeah.
9 o'clock at night.
Yeah,
See,
exactly.
what does it look like?
Yeah, so we had charts and everything. So but we worked our hearts out, and the CEOs decided that we'd be better off if we were together, so they merged the two companies, and that basically killed the companies.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because we hated each other, and we couldn't work together, and
Okay.
But we chose our system over theirs to move forward.
For the unified company.
Yeah, for the unified company.
Okay.
And then Kubota was the manufacturer. Actually, no, we didn't manufacture them here. We manufactured them in Japan. Manufactured them at Kubota outside of in Kofu, which is a couple hours outside of Shinjuku on the train. And I spent months in Kofu, right? Getting production lines and stuff up. This was another one where Kubota wanted to be in the computer business, right? And so they invested in Arden, and built a manufacturing facility, and lost their shirt, basically. So they ended up owning the company in the end, right? And it turned into Kubota Computer, and they did some other products. I think they did mostly graphics products later on, but they kept going for a while after the Stardent sort of ran its course.
They make construction equipment.
Yeah, they make construction equipment.
Don't they?
Yeah, they make really good Bobcat things,
Yeah.
right?
So it's unusual. But then, Schlumberger is another example of
Well,
big company.
they had no business being the computer.
Yeah,
business. They had
right.
no business. They were not equipped for it, and we spent a lot of time in Japan, more than enough time in Japan, but it was a really fun experience. I mean, so they'd ship them over, and we would do sort of final test here. It was great though. But there's a lot of stuff there, right? It was advanced PC layout. We were doing PC. I mean, we were doing big PC boards, right? But they were beyond layers ever done before. We're pushing the envelope on PC board routers. Matter of fact, the router we used to do the PC boards is now the router. It's evolved, for 20-something years, but is now the router that is used for chips for the chip development portion of Cadence. So Cadence's chip router is the router we originally used for PC boards. in the
Oh,
old days.
isn't
They
that
bought
interesting?
it. Yeah, they bought it a
Wow.
bunch of years later after we went through all that.
I didn't know you could translate
It's
from
basically the same problem.
PC board to. I
It's the
guess
same
it is.
It's the same problem.
Yeah, right.
So it was a great experience. I learned a lot about management, things to do and not to do. I mean, Alan was brilliant, crazy. Was an incredible manager. Was the worst manager.
Can you tell us one good story that epitomizes?
I think the one about the cars in the parking lot.
Okay, that is pretty good.
Is a
yeah.
really good one.
Okay.
There were some.
Right.
Ben was brilliant and crazy.
Ben, what's his last
Ben
name?
Wegbright.
Okay.
Yeah, ask Gordon about him. Ben would go hollering through the hallways and scare all the engineers. I mean, he was happy, but he'd scare everybody, right? And I learned a lot about marketing from Steve Blank. I mean, so one of the big lessons, I mean, aside from massive technology infusion that we did in a very short period of time, that was very advanced. I got to learn a lot about marketing too, right? Because I got to be very close friends with Steve Blank. Steve's been involved in the museum from the beginning. He did that great video on the history of Silicon Valley. I assume you've seen that.
Oh yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's great. And so Steve became a very close friend, and I got to learn a lot about marketing from him. And the biggest lesson for me in all this, well, there was some management lessons, because you had a bunch of brilliant people who couldn't work together. So it was extremely dysfunctional. And we had a company shrink, right, who'd come to meetings and help people communicate because they couldn't communicate, right? But the big part is the build it and they will come doesn't work, right? And up until then, most people took the philosophy of build it and they will come, right? And that just doesn't work. I mean, and I think that set the, sort of planted the seeds for Steve's evolution of the, Blank's evolution of the, of the lean startup, right? And how you focus on the customer, There's that whole movement now, and there's all that book by Eric Ries, and that all came out of Blank's teachings at Stanford and Berkeley and all that stuff. And I think that's where the seeds were planted, right? In the we were on a mission, and we knew what we were doing, and we didn't really focus too much on what the customers really wanted, right? And about account control and all that kind of stuff. And we got our butt kicked. So that was an interesting lesson. It was heartbreaking, right? Because I invested 4 years of my life 24/7 doing it, right? And this was, we were going to build a real company, and it was going to be a big, successful company, and I was going to be able to be a real player in the company, and it was my future, right? And then gone.
Right, and that's quite common in engineering, isn't it?
Very common, and very common in startups.
How do you think people deal with that, generally speaking?
It's hard. I mean, look, I've interviewed lots of people over the years, and I mean, I've seen people who've done 10 startups and never had one of them get traction, right? And so at some point in time, you start wondering, does that person, is it them or is it the startup? Right? I mean, do they have bad judgment in choosing where they go? Right? And so when I interview people for jobs, I always explore why they chose, not necessarily just about the companies they picked, but why they picked those companies and what was their thought process behind choosing to go to a different company, right? And so it's not just random, but there was actually a thought process behind it. And if you look at someone who's gone to 10 companies that have failed, you kind of go, well, I'm not sure I want them joining my company because I might be 11. So and it's, look, I know lots of people have worked for years and years and years, and have never had a success in that. I mean, I've been very lucky, very, very lucky. I've had some failures, and the failures have actually been great because I've learned a lot from them. I wouldn't be who I am today, and I wouldn't have learned all the things I learned today if it hadn't been for some of the companies that failed. Right, and I've also been very fortunate, had lots of successes, and it's been great. And so it's been a good balance, I would say.
And yes, I certainly know that's a problem for a lot of engineers, and that they can go through a whole career and essentially never have any.
Yeah, never have a hit.
And you have a shipping product.
Yeah.
So
yeah, no, that's really frustrating.
That's
and then on the other side, you get the first of all, everyone has this sort of misinterpretation that a lot of these companies are overnight successes. Right? And the reality is they're not. Right? I mean, most companies take years to become successful. Even the ones that are overnight successes usually had their foundation in something else, and they got pivoted or something. And that's a new word that everyone uses, but in the old days it was called something else. But basically pivoted. But it takes a lot of years to build a really successful company, and it's tough if you've made your bet and it doesn't work out. But then other people just kind of hop around looking for a quick hit, and it's not like that. Sometimes it is, but mostly it's not.
Let's jump ahead just a bit. I want to connect what you said about people. For example, the field of dreams philosophy, build it and they will come. Did Steve and Apple apply that at all, or did they do market research?
Apple did no market research.
Interesting.
Yeah, none.
Okay.
But it wasn't build it and they will come. I mean, we had a very good understanding of where things were going.
Okay.
Right? And so, everything we did was a sort of natural evolution of kind of what made sense. And so it was very sensible. As a matter of fact, Apple very specifically doesn't do, market research. But I'd say they're an outlier.
Is there a reason for that? They don't find it useful?
Yeah, it's just not useful.
Okay.
I mean, so here's the trade-off, right? Is you can go out and ask customers what they want, but they can't really tell you what they want, right? Because they don't know what's possible. Mm-hmm. Like if you're doing advanced technology stuff, right? So they're looking in the rearview mirror, right? So what you need to understand is what their needs are, right? Don't ask them what they want. Understand their needs, and if you can understand their needs, then you can build products that meet their needs. And then what you have to do is quickly iterate, based on the feedback you get on your products. Right? And that's basically what Apple does.
Right.
Right? I mean, the whole iPod run was, what technologies enable what? what do we get enabled by technology that's coming, and how do we drive that as quickly as possible? And I mean, the basic idea of do you do a music player? Well, that's kind of obvious because everyone loves music, right? It's, if you get the right price point, right, with the right set of capabilities, it's a natural home run, right? And you have an existence proof because you got the Sony Walkman. They'd sold 300 million Walkmans. So portable music is a good market. You don't have to do a market study for that.
Interesting though, because at the time, this is just my own personal reflection, but I remember, why would a computer company be getting into portable music players? Or a phone later. I mean, we can talk about this.
Well, we'll get back to that,
but later.
I think that's an interesting discussion.
Because
it wasn't an accident.
It's not intuitive.
Yeah, it wasn't an accident, though. It was very well thought out.
Like
but
IBM.
We'll get back to that.
IBM didn't make iPods, for example.
Compaq almost did.
But, did it?
Yeah, so the first iPod was actually designed by Compaq, right? And they never shipped it, right? But the guys who worked on it, we ended up hiring in our advanced, in the architecture team, several years later. They had nothing to do with iPod, but a few years later, they joined the architecture team working on the Mac stuff, and they pulled out that, like, here's our presentation from several years before the iPod came out.
Oh, great.
Of doing the iPod.
Yeah.
Right? But it wasn't time yet.
Did they have the micro drive in there?
No, there wasn't a micro drive.
Okay,
See, that's the point.
So it could only store like 10.
There's a convergence of technologies that has to occur to build a really great product. And that's the art part. Okay, the science is figuring out what technologies. The art part is how do you put those technologies together, and at what point in time are they capable enough and cost effective enough to build a home run product. And I think that's something that we're really good at Apple, right, when I was there. Right, we're really good at that. And we did a lot of firsts, right? I mean, the iPod, the one I'm almost more proud of is Wi-Fi base stations, right? And Wi-Fi. I mean, we created that, right? We didn't invent it, but we created it, right? And that's one of the things that having learned about marketing and stuff from blank, right? I mean, I could see market opportunities, right? And that was such a clear market opportunity, and we were years ahead of everyone else.
I think it was obvious to anyone the first time they tried a wireless device, whether it was your mouse it's like, this is totally the way to go.
It was like going from it's like the Wizard of Oz going from black and white to color,
yeah,
right? I mean,
that's right.
Just,
yeah.
And so I think in some ways,
that's
of all the things I've done, that one might be the biggest impact, right? It could be. I don't know. It's a tough trade-off. Whether Apple becoming a $1 trillion company or the world using Wi-Fi. I mean, they're both pretty good. Yeah. So I'm pretty happy about both of them. So, in any case,
that's wonderful.
Back to Ardent.
Okay, let's wrap up Stellar, Ardent, Stardent.
Yeah, it was great though because again, we got to develop processes around how to develop products, how to design chips, how to build products. How do you do software development, reliability, chip design? I mean, all these things. We were just pushing the envelope on all of them. So it was unbelievable, and we were going fast.
Would you say, what's the percentage of engineers in this company versus?
Almost all.
100% engineers.
All. Not 100%, because there was a small marketing and sales team.
90,
but
80.
It was
Yeah.
And it was brilliant people.
Yeah.
And they all went on to do amazing things, right? I mean, and part of the reason, I mean, I went to Next after, part of the reason I went to Next, but primarily part of the reason I went to Apple was something I learned from a guy named Rich Lowenthal. So Rich had been one of the senior engineering leaders at Convergent, had come as head of product development or whatever at Ardent, Dana Ardent, had run afoul of Alan, had left, had come back. He was my boss when he left, and then when he came back, I was his boss, and whatever, and Rich left kind of before the shit hit the fan at the company, and joined this piece of shit company called Stratacom. Right? And we're all like, why would you go to Stratacom? It's failing, right? And Rich took what he learned at Ardent, used that to completely turn Stratacom around, and they sold Stratacom for some ungodly amount of money to Cisco a couple years later.
And what were they making? What was
network shit. I don't know.
Okay,
I mean,
hubs and routers
or I mean, they're making routers or something. I don't know, right? But it was a huge acquisition for Cisco. Wow. Those guys all made a ton of dough, And Rich was at Cisco for quite a few years. I mean, now he does VC stuff. He did ChargePoint, and he did a couple other companies, right? So he was mayor of Cupertino for a while, right? So I did a video for him, like saying, Rich is a good guy. You should, you should vote for him. But what I learned from him is you don't need to do a startup to build a successful company, right? Because in my mind, you want to build a successful company, you come up with an idea, you raise some money, you hire some people, and you go build a company, right? And the idea of taking a shitty company and turning it around, where you actually have, a customer base and a market and products and revenue, and and you may need to raise some more money, but whatever, that was like this light bulb went off for me, as a professional, because it cuts like dramatic number of years out of the whole process.
You've got all these systems already.
You've got all this stuff in place and people and all that stuff. And yeah, you may have to rejigger everything, but
right.
but and look, you may need to fire a bunch of people. Yeah. That's just what happens, right? But you go by the Star Trek philosophy of the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few or the one, right? and it does, it's terrible, but it's something you have to do for the needs of the many, right? So. But that set off a light bulb for me, because I was one of those aha moments about companies, right? And it guided all my future path from there. So
no more startups for you? Was that the lesson, or?
Yeah, that was my last startup. Well, not quite my last startup.
Okay.
Almost my last startup. I had a sort of startup, but not really, right? So, but yeah, basically it was no more startups. Right? I advise startups and help out people and stuff, but I'm not going to do the work myself, right? So it's too long, it's too tough a slog. So, any case, things got worse and worse at Ardent. The merger wasn't great. Ardent at that point in time, the merger wasn't great. I didn't like my boss. He quit, right? He was like, geez, I'm upset with all this stuff. He goes, well, go home and you kick the wife. I'm like, I'm not married. He goes, go home and kick the dog. I haven't got a dog. I got a cat. He goes, go home and kick the cat. I'm like, that's not the right answer, right? So I started thinking about what I was going to do next, right? And I talked to Bill Worley at HP about coming and doing the next generation processor, not the Spectrum, but or HPPA, but the other one they did with Intel. But they were in the early stages of that.
Itanium?
Itanium, yes, right. So I talked to Bill about coming, because Bill was back at HP by now.
Itanic, as Gordon Bell calls it.
Exactly, yeah. And I'm like, well, what's changed at HP? It's like nothing. I came in and met with the same group of people, and it's like nothing's changed. So I decided not to do that, and I talked to a couple other people. And then the phone rings one day, and it's an admin going, please hold for Steve Jobs. And I'm like, okay. I knew who Steve was. He wasn't like Steve, right? He was Steve Jobs. He was.
Had you met him before?
No, never met him.
Okay.
And the funny thing was when I started when I left HP, the guys at Motorola go, why don't you talk to Next? And I'm like, great. I'll talk to anyone, because I was talking to MIPS, I was talking to Ardent, I was, to Dana, I was talking to a bunch of different companies. And so they said, well, we'll introduce you to Rich Page. He's at Next. They're just starting Next, right? And you guys should meet. I'm like, great. And then Rich never called me, right? They sent him a note, saying you should call John, and and he never did. So I knew about the company, and I'd read about it and everything, but I didn't really know very much about it. And I know who Steve was, but I'm not really a PC guy. Right, I'm a workstation guy, right? I did workstations at HP. The personal computer division ended up doing terrible personal computers a few years later, right? I'd left and gone to a engineering, a personal supercomputing company, but I knew who Steve was. Right, so I'm like, okay, hi Steve, and Steve goes, he goes, I hear you're the best engineer in the Valley. I'm like, here we go, right? So reality distortion field 101, right? So I'm like, so we chatted for a while, and he goes, I'm looking for someone to come and run engineering, and it turned out actually that I'd be working for Rich Page, who was actually running engineering, but Steve was about to undermine Rich. Rich didn't know any of this at the time, and so Steve wanted a backup for when Rich quit, that he'd have someone to run engineering. So I went in to meet with Steve, and we hit it off really, really well. And then I met with the rest of the engineering team, and we all hit it off. And then I met with Rich, and we had a heart-to-heart about, hey, your boss is going to screw you. And he goes, oh yeah, this is typical for Steve, right? And so we kind of had an agreement that I would keep him informed of whatever happened along the way and stuff. And
that's very.
But they were building really interesting products. They were building sort of this hybrid between PCs and workstations, right, with the next machine.
So were you attracted to the product, the people, or
yeah,
everything?
Well, I mean, look, there's not that many places where you can build high-volume, innovative computers, right? Personal computers, or small computers. I mean, and there's just not that many places, right? And if you build big machines, they take a long time. I mean, one of the things I learned at Ardent was you build one of these big machines, it takes a long time. You can't do one of those every year.
How long was that development cycle? About
3 years.
3 years,
right,
yeah.
which is a long time.
Right.
And that was typical when I was at HP too. It would take us 3-4 years.
Were there parts of the system that were no longer the latest thing by the time it had
Yeah, of course.
shipped?
Yeah, I mean, that's the problem, right? It's too long a cycle time, right? So one of the things I started getting in my head is we want to do 1-year cycles. Now, that leads to a problem in that it takes more than a year to do a chip, right? So then you have to really have a pipeline of chips you're working on. Yeah. And so you have to have enough resources to where you can put in place a roadmap with a pipeline of chips for both processors and control chips and all of that. And
now, is this to make your own chips?
Well, yeah.
Or to buy outside?
No, you can buy stuff outside. But,
right.
But if you want to build a real system, you got to do your own chips.
Okay. Even the microprocessor?
No, you don't have to build a microprocessor.
Okay.
You can buy that outside.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I think it had a 56001 DSP in there, the next?
Well, it was a 68K based, and then it had a DSP in there. But then, the next generation
But it
stuff,
wasn't very...
I did the last slab, right, which was basically the cube done correctly, right, in a slab format, because the cube was silly, right? But I did the slab, right, but I really came there to do NRW, which was next RISC workstation. So it was their PowerPC based. Actually, it started off as Motorola 88,000, right? And then when that product got killed, when Apple and IBM merged the PowerPC efforts, so we'd actually started off with 88,000 and switched to PowerPC in the middle of the project. But I came in to run that project and do the chips with it and everything else. And so we developed all new processes of how you do stuff and chip development and all that stuff that they hadn't really had in place at Next. And
part of that was what you did at Ardent. It sounds like too, right? Building systems.
Next generation version of it. I pulled some of the people who helped me. We did everything in Verilog. It was done in Synopsys. We actually funded John Sanguinetti was my made CAD guy, and we actually funded him to do another company, which did Verilog compilers or something. I forget what, and that ended up getting acquired by Synopsys or somebody. I think it was acquired by, I forget who acquired it. But in any case.
So Rich Page was your
my supervisor when I got there.
Okay.
Yeah. He didn't last long.
Tell us about that. What was he like to work with?
Well, Rich was fine. I mean, Rich is a really good guy, right? And he was an Apple fellow, but he wasn't, in fairness, he wasn't the best manager of a big group. And we had a big group. I mean, there was a lot of people. We had hundreds of engineers.
Hundreds of people.
Yeah, I mean, it was hundreds of people, both in hardware and then there's another couple hundred in software. Run by Bud Tribble. So shortly after, I kind of started running everything, and Rich kind of moved up, and then we got out of the hardware business, and Rich left. Well, Rich left. I kind of took over, and then we basically split the company. All right. So I mean, look, the next NRW thing was a great product. It would have been a very successful product, but we never got a chance to come to market. We spent a lot of time with IBM, with Motorola, working with their design teams. It was, really fine-tuning PowerPC. We built a great system around it. I got to know a lot of the IBM guys, which was great. My favorite IBM person is Nick D'Onofrio. He's kind of my he's one of my heroes.
Former CEO, I think, right?
Well, I don't think he was CEO. He ran engineering at IBM.
Okay.
Yeah, and
But I think he became CEO, actually.
no, I don't think he.
No?
Nick never became CEO
Nick
of IBM.
D'Onofrio.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, he ran engineering. He ran the labs for a long time. I mean, Nick's great. He's retired now, but he's super. But I got a chance to meet Nick in that process, and it was impressive to me because, well, I'll fill this in later. I'll come back. Well, in any case, a few years later, I was struggling with what to do with our company because IBM had just screwed us. And I sent Nick a note, and I went, hey, you guys just screwed us. I don't know what to do with my company.
How did they screw you?
Well, they basically stopped doing PowerPC workstations. Right? We were doing sort of clones of IBM PowerPC workstations at a future company we'll get to. And IBM just stopped doing it one day. And we were going to be the compact to their IBM, right? And all of a sudden we were we were the leader in PowerPC-based workstations, which was not, wasn't going to be viable. Just as a startup.
It wasn't a question of them cutting off your supply of parts.
No, it was but in the end, that's what it meant, right? Because if they're not going to use it in their own products, right? I mean, in high volume, it's never going to be competitive, right? So it was a death knell for us, right? And then shortly thereafter, Microsoft pulled support for NT, and I mean, it was going to be a cascading effect. And I'm like, so I sent him an email, kind of going, dude, you screwed me. Right? And I expected never hear anything. And I got an email right back from him going, really sorry, please come and visit me, at your convenience. And so we contacted his assistant. I flew out there. He spent a couple of hours with me. I mean, this is a guy who runs like a lot of IBM. And I'm some stupid shit little startup with, 120 people, right? And this was after Next. This wasn't Next, right? But boy, he treated me so well, and I was like so blown away that it was such a life lesson, in that. So always try to treat people respectfully and well, even when you're screwing them. Any case, so back to Next. So yes, I mean Next was a shit show, right? I mean it was just total chaos. They couldn't sell anything. It was a great product, but it was never finished. Nothing was ever finished. And because Steve was always pushing stuff out the door before it was ready.
Is that on the hardware side? Or
everything. Everything. The
software?
software wasn't ready. The hardware wasn't ready. Nothing was ready.
Really?
Right. And
what was the major market? I know education was a part.
Well, it was supposed to be. It was way too expensive for education.
Right. And there were big discounts, I think, at some
Yeah, I mean, they gave them
point.
away. Right.
Yeah.
And we had this factory in Fremont that was the world's best factory at building a single-sided board of this exact dimension. And if it was anything else, it was a terrible factory. Right? And
I'd love to pick your brain a bit about that because that was a real showpiece.
Of course.
It was
that was Steve's pride and joy.
Yes.
Yeah, it was terrible.
And I think was some of that, Japanophobia also.
Well, I got to remember that Next was funded by Canon.
Oh, okay.
Right?
So not Japanophobia.
So
Definitely
no,
not.
No, I mean, they were partial owner of the company, and they played a reasonable role in not what was going on because Steve ran the place. Make no mistake about that.
Because deploying that level of robotics is pretty unusual for that time outside of Japan.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. No, it was very impressive for a board this size, exactly this size, single-sided, which is not where the world was going. Right. And our second generation products, I mean, they weren't that size and they weren't single-sided, and it was a real problem. But in any case, yeah, I mean, sales and marketing it was too expensive a product. It was a product that was before its time. I mean, it was great.
Why was it too expensive?
Because it cost too much.
Just the
everything.
The cost of goods.
Everything. Everything.
Yeah.
I mean, the manufacturing cost, the enclosure cost, the parts cost. Everything. It was expensive. Right. The chip. I mean, it was. And we weren't doing high volume, right? Because they were low volume. I mean, every now and then someone would push a button, turn on the factory, it would spit out a bunch of these, and then they'd turn off the button, and that would be it for a while.
But the intended audience was education or engineers, or
no, it was education.
Okay.
No, it wasn't engineers. These were
It was not considered.
These were high-end personal computers.
Okay, so it's not a workstation per se.
Well, but it really was a workstation. I mean, it was Unix-based.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
So it was neither fish nor fowl. That was
Okay.
that was the issue, right?
Right.
And it was beautiful. I mean, it was beautiful looking. The software was beautiful. The software was far more advanced than
I find even the board layouts are beautiful.
anything out there. I mean, it was all beautiful, right? But you know, no market for it.
Yeah.
So I got there the second half of Next. So Next had already been going. They'd already shipped the Cube. And so I came in to sort of clean up engineering and get the Next Risk workstation done, and then take over all of engineering once that was done. That was the plan. And we never got to ship NRW, although you guys have one, because I gave you one, I'm pretty sure. If I didn't give you one, I could give you one.
Okay, we definitely want one. I'm going to go check afterwards.
Yeah, I think I gave you one.
Is that what it's called? NRW?
NRW, yeah, Next Risk Workstation, NRW, yeah. If you don't have one, I got one, I'll give to you.
Wonderful. And that never shipped?
Never shipped.
And it was based on a 020?
No, it was PowerPC.
Oh, PPC. Okay.
No, it was actually 88,000. And in the end, well, I don't know if we ever actually switched it. It was 88,000 based. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
How about manufacturing it next? Was that basically just people lined up with soldering irons, or was it was there a degree
No, it was all
of
automated over in the factory.
out in
In Fremont.
Fremont?
Yeah.
That's all production happened over there.
Oh, everything happened in
Oh,
Fremont.
okay.
Yeah. I don't know where the PC boards were made. I mean, I assume those were made in Japan or somewhere else. So I don't really remember. But
How was
maybe, I don't remember. I don't remember.
How did the hardware and software divisions work together? Were they sort of on friendly
Yeah,
terms?
it was sort of
or
unfriendly. Yeah, you know, I mean.
more or less?
Yeah, you know, I mean, we got along.
Avi Tavanian and...
You know, Avi wasn't running software. Bud was.
Oh, okay.
Right. Bud was running it. Damoni was in there. He did Java later on. Avi was there. There's a couple other guys there too. I forget all the senior guys. But Bud was the head of software. Avi was sort of head of OS. You know, Avi had been brought in from Carnegie Mellon to do the mock stuff underneath all of it, right? And had other guys doing the upper levels and stuff. But I mean, look, it set the foundation for macOS 10, right? And so it's very important what happened there, right? And so eventually, and we were running out of money basically, right? And so Steve called Canon and went, if you don't deposit, I don't remember the exact number, so I'm going to make this up a little bit, but basically he called me and said, if you don't deposit a check for $20 million tomorrow, I'm going to shut the doors, right? And they went, really? And then he goes, yes. And obviously there was a big kerfuffle in Japan, and Monday morning there was $20 million deposited, right? So we got to live another day, but it was clearly things were like kind of heading downhill because we weren't selling. Right? I mean, we had some small niche markets. We did have some universities, right? And we had financial guys. So some of the option trader guys figured out they could write software an order of magnitude faster on top of Next Step than they could anywhere else, right? And this to them was, I mean, this is dollar signs, right? And so
Tim Berners-Lee on
yeah, exactly.
The web was created on a Next.
Exactly. Yeah. So there was pockets of places where people got it,
right,
and where their budgets were such that they, he could have, Tim could afford to buy whatever he wanted to buy, right? Because he's at CERN, right? And the option traders in Chicago, they can buy whatever they want, right? So whatever makes them most productive. So we had a market, and we were selling computers, but it wasn't a mass market. It wasn't going to work. So it became evident it wasn't going to work. Steve had hired a president. That didn't work. The president tried to sell the company to Sun. They forgot to tell Steve about it. McNeely calls Steve. I was in the room at the time, and McNeely goes, hey, Steve, they just tried to sell me your company. What do you think? And Steve kind of went crazy. Long story short is we weren't going anywhere. And so we decided to split the company. And by then, the next step on Intel effort had been going on for about a year, so they had it running on PCs. So we were going to split the company into two. So there was going to be a software company where you had, the Next OS running on top of standard hardware. And Canon, in the number 3 Japanese company who wanted to be in the computer business, we start with Matsushita, we go to Kubota, and now we're with Canon. Canon decided they wanted to be in the computer business. They were actually selling lots of computers, Right? They had the Mac franchise in Japan. Right? They had some mainframe. I forget which one they were selling in other countries. I mean, so they had the Canon sales knew how to sell computers. Right? And so they were proficient at the art. And so, but they wanted to be in the computer business. And I'm like, are you sure? And they go, yes, we're sure. And I'm like, okay. So I was the bag man, basically. So my job was to make sure that that the next software company had sufficient money to continue on as an independent company. And to do that, we had to do a cram down on Canon.
Sorry, what's a cram down?
You know, basically make them take other stuff, and so the money stayed with Next, right? So we basically sold Canon the hardware division in exchange for like you know, a bulk of the software company. So they ended up owning a small piece of the software company. They got the entire hardware company, right? And
which had a very finite lifespan, I would imagine.
it wasn't long. But they wanted to be in the hardware business. So the deal is we were going to do a joint company between the hardware employees of Next and Canon. Canon was going to be majority owner. I was going to run the thing. And we took 100, give or take, people from Next. We took all the IP, all the hardware IP. Canon owned it, licensed it to us. Right? That includes processes, tools, you know, the actual designs, everything. Right?
I didn't know you could do that to processes. You can
Yeah, they took all the processes.
copyright them, or
Well, no. They, I mean,
patent
but
them,
they just got them, right?
Just
I mean,
ways
there's
of doing
tools,
things.
ways of doing things.
Okay.
They got all of that.
I got it.
And then they donated that. They, you know, that was part of their contribution. And the funding, they funded us, right? And so we spun that out of Next, right? And so I shut down the factory. You know, basically got people to take, you know, pennies on the dollar for what we owed them. So we stiffed a whole bunch of people there, and we moved, you know, a bunch of, because Next had debt to Canon, so we got rid of that. They got the hardware, they get lost. So basically the software company got to go off. They had a bunch of cash from what Next had in the bank. They had no liabilities. Canon had a small ownership piece of it, but not a lot. And Steve could then continue on as a software company, right? And I took all the hardware, went to work for Canon, in effect, right? Kept all of our assets. They invested money in us, right? And we jettisoned the factory, and you know, we could build anywhere we wanted, right? And so that's how Firepower came about, which was kind of what we spun out of when we spun out of Next. So I was the president. They sent over a Japanese CEO, very nice man, who knew nothing about computers and didn't speak English. Right? And we bought him, we leased him a Cadillac, and we bought him a golf membership at Green Hills here, and he was happy. Right? And he'd go over to Fuki Sushi every night for dinner. That was his restaurant, and he'd go there every night, and he was happy.
how effective could he be?
He didn't do anything.
Without speaking the language.
He didn't do anything.
Okay.
Right. But they sent over a bunch of Japanese engineers, you know, 20 or so engineers to learn how we did things. All right. And they were good engineers. All right. And we trained them on all the tools and processes and everything else, and they became part of the team. And we went, and so what we were doing was basically going back, you know, we basically took NRW, we redesigned it for PowerPC, you know, a next generation version of it, right? And so we were building custom workstations, you know, high-end workstations, using Windows NT as our operating system instead of using NextStep. So we're using a standard operating system on top of custom hardware. And this was part of, you know, we're basically doing IBM clones, because Willie Shee, who's now a professor at Harvard, but Willie was running the personal systems division at IBM, which was the PowerPC personal systems division, which was doing PowerPC workstations, right? And we had a standard, sort of an architectural standard that was co-developed between us, Apple, and IBM. You know, the PowerPC personal systems, the PowerPC personal systems division, and so the three of us basically had this committee, architecture committee, and we defined the architecture. And the idea was, you know, we'd kind of be like a Compaq, right? And Apple was doing their own thing. They were putting their own software, you know, on top of it. We were going to put Windows NT, as was IBM. and they were also going to put OS/2 on it.
Did you use a chirp, like a common?
That was Chirp.
Okay.
That's what Chirp was.
Okay.
That's what Chirp. I mean, Chirp ended up because of that, right? Common Hardware Reference Platform, right? So that was how Chirp ended up, right? And it was basically the three of us, the three companies doing that, right? So so we built some products, and then in the middle of it all, Microsoft decided to no longer support NT. Right? And well, first the first step was IBM decides to not do PowerPC personal systems. Right? And Willie leaves IBM, he goes to Kodak or something, and so now we are the industry leaders of PowerPC personal computers. Right? Because Apples are different because they got their own OS. So
this is Powerhouse Systems.
This was
right?
Powerhouse, Firepower, Powerhouse Systems, right?
Sorry, it had two
They had
names?
both names, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. We had to change the name because we couldn't get the copyright on Powerhouse. So
it was first Powerhouse, then
and then it became Firepower. Oh,
Got it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, exactly. And we had a great group of people, a really good group of people, and they all ended up going to do different things. I mean, our head of marketing was Phil Schiller, right? Who I'd hired from he wasn't at Apple. He was at not Adobe, but the other one. And Ron Okamoto was there, right? And Ron is now head of at Apple is head of developer relations, right? And Ron was at Adobe. And I mean, great group of engineers, so we built these incredible systems. They were really good, and they were slabs, sort of typical like what the PC looked like at the time, but they were dramatically faster, based on PowerPC.
What would the
and they
price
ran
point
Windows NT.
roughly? $10K?
$2,000?
Oh,
No, it was like $2K. Yeah,
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was reasonable.
Okay.
Right? It was a little more expensive than a high-end Mac, or it was about the same price as a high-end Mac, right? So, but we weren't getting any traction. So I tried to sell the company to Apple. We were this close to selling the company to Apple because there was a kid in Switzerland who'd kind of ripped off the Apple ROM and figured out how to build a layer on top of Chirp that would allow you to run Mac OS. All right, and we did that. So we could demo. We couldn't ship it, but we could demo Mac OS running on it. So we were this close to selling the company to Spindler, and because he needed high-end Macs, his high-end Macs were terrible, right? And unfortunately, he got fired in the middle of all that. So that destroyed. So then we tried to sell it to Group Bull, and because they were doing PowerPC workstations also. Right, and so we almost had to deal with Group Bull, but that kind of fell through. And in the end, Motorola bought us, Motorola Personal Systems Division.
Bull is one of the few companies that still does Itanium, I believe.
Right. Well, it's because they're funded by the government, so they can waste as much money as they want. Right. It's just ridiculous. So, yeah, I mean, so Firepower was really interesting. The people who did Firepower were then. So there was this diaspora that went to a bunch of different companies, joined Bechtelsheim and did that networking startup that got sold to Cisco, ended up at Cisco doing that. A bunch of other people went to, a bunch of them went to Apple. When the Motorola thing shut down, a bunch of them came to Apple with me. Matter of fact, the Motorola guys think I did it on purpose, right? That I sold them Firepower. Right, then I went to Apple. I had Steve cancel their Mac OS license, right, so that they would shut down that group and then we could hire that group. That was their thinking of what we actually did, but that's not what happened. So that's the Firepower story. So great product. Never shipped very many. We shipped a few. Windows NT never really got finished. Was part of the problem. Microsoft never really finished it. Yeah, and then then it turned into Windows whatever the next version of Windows was.
So when NT came out, it was
big deal.
To my way of thinking, the first truly stable, somewhat robust version of Windows. Maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, no, that's right. But they never finished it, and then it got rolled into whatever the following Windows was, and it was the base underneath the rest of Windows.
Yeah. There's apparently some VMS legacy DNA.
I'm sure there's something in there. Yeah.
Yes. Same guy worked on them. Anyway.
Exactly. Yeah. What's his name?
Dave Cutler.
Cutler, right? Yeah. So I used to hang out with Cutler, and we kind of crafted this strategy, on a bunch of stuff together.
Oh, neat.
Yeah. And Microsoft was very helpful in those days.
Right.
It was sort of my first interaction with Microsoft.
Like most people forgot, for a while Microsoft was Apple's biggest software producer.
They made more money on Macs than we did.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, seriously.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh my.
Yeah, we'd sell a Mac, they'd make more money.
Wow.
Yeah.
Just from selling Word,
Word,
Excel,
Office,
and
basically Office,
all
right?
that stuff.
Yeah.
So
where did we leave off?
We left
see.
off.
We were kind of ending the whole Firepower experience.
Ending Firepower, moving to Apple. How did that happen?
So again, this is where IBM shuts down the PowerPC personal systems. I go visit Nick. Nick goes, you should go do something else because this isn't going to work, right? And he basically said, look, IBM's not going to help you. So we'll sell you parts, and we'll be your partner, but we're not going to help you do anything, right? And
meaning we'll sell you the microprocessor.
Yeah, but we're not going to help create the market. We're not going to.
Okay.
Which made the whole thing untenable. So we went off to sell the company. Ended up selling it to Motorola. And Canon was pretty unhappy, but too bad. All right, that's how it works. Interestingly enough, the Canon guys, although they lost some money, they got a lot of benefits from this. One of the benefits is their engineers got trained how to do chip development on the modern, sort of using modern techniques. And so that team went back to Japan and became the core of Canon's chip group, which I think is still going. Last I heard, it's been a couple of years since I talked to some of the guys over there, because I still keep in touch with some of the people. But they'd set up a chip group, they'd put these guys in it to kind of lead it, and basically almost all the chips inside of, custom chips inside of Canon were done using the processes that we had developed at Firepower. Next, then Firepower, then, and so there was that legacy. That was kind of one. In a funny way, the next Apple acquisition sort of, I don't know how it actually happened, but we were kind of scrounging around for customers at Firepower, and B was doing their workstation at the time, and so
that was a 603 based PowerPC 603.
Yeah, it was. I don't remember what it was based on, but in any case,
yeah.
Their operating system, was pretty good. Okay. But they didn't really have the horsepower to do hardware. They didn't have enough juice, and so we had talked to them about them taking our hardware platform and putting their BOS on it and selling it as their product. So instead of them doing hardware development, we could do the hardware development. They could OEM our product, which would have made a lot of sense.
We being Firepower?
Firepower, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So the B would use Firepower's hardware. They could do their own OS. We would continue with NT, whatever, or we'd switch to BO, who knows what. But there was some opportunity to do a deal. And so I got to know Sackerman, through that process.
Okay.
Right. Sackerman was running engineering.
Bob?
No, you can't do that on camera to me.
Okay, it's okay.
Sackerman. Now you're making me Google.
I'm sorry.
My memory is shit for this kind of stuff.
No.
Sackerman.
Steve, okay.
Yeah. Right.
Thank you.
Steve had been at Apple, went to B, was sort of ran the product development at B or whatever, and then he ended up back at Apple and did not get to run the OS group. He was supposed to be running the OS group after Avi, but he didn't get the tap on the shoulder. In any case, Sackerman and I were talking and stuff, and as well as some of the other engineers there, and I picked up the rumor through all of this that Apple was about to acquire B. And I'm like, whoa, like that's wrong. Right? That doesn't make any sense at all. And we were in acquisition talks with Apple around that time as well. Right? Or before that, right? And this is when Spindler was running things, and then he got the boot, and then Gil took over, right? So So through all this, there's a lot of commotion going on around Apple, around B, around us, around IBM, NT. I mean, there's a lot of turmoil in this whole space. So I hear this rumor that that B is about to be acquired by Apple, and I called Steve. And I said, Steve, I don't know what's going on. I don't know anything about it, but here's the rumor. That's stupid, because next step is, Next OS is so much better than BOS that that you ought to get in there and sell them Next. Right? And so this was kind of October of '96, something like that. And I kind of, and Steve went, okay, well, with Steve and I would talk every couple of months.
Just on the phone, or?
Yeah, we just talk on the phone. We get together, go for walks sometimes. I'd see him, on a regular basis. Wasn't weekly, but a fairly regular basis. During the couple of years after I left Next and was running Firepower. Because I did that for like 3 years. So we would chat occasionally.
I want to ask you what it was like to work with him, but we can do that later.
Yeah, it's so yeah, and I'd worked for Rich at Next, but then I'd worked for Steve directly for half the time maybe, so I'd gotten to know Steve really well through the Next period, and we worked very closely together at Next, and so we kept in touch, and I didn't really get any kind of reaction out of him. It was kind of okay, well, thank you for the information was kind of it, and that was the last I thought about it. All right, so we closed the deal with Motorola, and it was funny because we were 120 people. Motorola sends in almost that many people to do due diligence. I remember one of the big fights during the acquisition talks was the fact that they wanted all of us to take drug tests, right? And our software team was like, ah, right? So we cut a deal where the
What are you implying? Nothing.
we cut a deal where we grandfathered in all the current employees. Okay. So anyone new we were going to hire had to take a drug test, right? And Motorola finally agreed to that. So everyone in the interview process were like, dude, you're going to take a drug test, so be cool, all right? The first hire fails his drug test. It was unbelievable. So through that whole process. In any case, we closed the deal. I get, I'm not part of the deal, so I'm a consultant to Motorola for the next 6 months, for the computer group for the next 6 months. And Glenn Maranker, who was kind of my number two at Firepower, takes over the Motorola group that he goes to work for Motorola, and they go off to build notebooks for Motorola, Mac notebooks, basically, because Motorola had a Mac license. At the time, right? So they were building Mac-compatible products, and their first products were notebooks. So they went off to go do that, and I kind of sailed off in the sunset for the next 6 months.
You must have been pretty tired.
I was pretty tired
at this point.
So I needed a break.
Yeah.
And so, I kept trying to help Motorola, but they didn't really. I mean, it was a you're on the payroll, but we don't really want to hear from you. Right, I'm like, all right, whatever. I try to set up meetings to go down to Phoenix, which is where they were headquartered, and I'd go occasionally, but they weren't really interested. So I said, okay, I'm going on vacation, and I went on vacation, and I took a couple months off, and I went wandering around Europe, I'm on the Isle of Skye, which is off the coast of Scotland. It's where Talisker comes from, if you're a Scotch drinker, and I'm sitting around Christmas afternoon, the Christmas Eve afternoon before Christmas, and I'm reading it was FT or something, and I open the paper up, and it says Next is about to be acquired by Apple. So I go call my voicemail, and my home number, my voicemail. I call my home number in the U.S. and I listen to my answering machine, it's got a call from a couple of reporters who want information on background about Apple, and so I spent Christmas afternoon talking to reporters, or Christmas Eve afternoon talking to reporters from Scotland, about the coming acquisition, And
But this is before you had even been
no, I had nothing to do with any of
been
this.
told about the
You
acquisition.
know, I didn't know anything about it. I just read about it in the
It's
FT.
kind of like athletes learning they've been traded
Yeah.
in the papers, I suppose.
Except I didn't work at Next, right? So
yes,
I mean, you know, I
right.
wasn't an employee or anything. I
Right.
just, you know, so I called Mike Slade. Mike Slade had been head of marketing at Next and had left and gone and done Starwave and got bought by ESPN, and that's now what, like all that online stuff for ESPN is what Starwave turned into. But you know, Mike's the only guy who worked for you know, for the three big heavyweights, right? You know, Jobs, Gates, and you know, and
Ellison?
No. Gates' partner.
Paul Allen?
Paul Allen, yeah.
Okay.
Because Paul Allen funded Starwave. So so in any case, so I called Slade. I go, what's going on? And he goes, you know, and he kept pretty close touch with Steve. And he goes, yeah, you know, they're getting acquired. So I'm like, great, right? So that, you know, that's interesting. Well, I'm glad that happened. That was, you know, I may have planted the seed. I might not have. Who knows, right? But it's a good thing that happened. And you know, I'm a stockholder at Next, so that's good for me. You know, from a personal point of view, and it's good for Apple because Next is a great company. And it's got great software, and you know, it'll be a good future. And then I kind of forgot about it. And then a couple of days later, you know, I get a message saying, you know, call Steve. All right, so I call Steve, and he goes, you know, hey, Apple's reorganizing, and they're looking for someone to run engineering, and you know, you should call the head of HR. And I'm like, okay. So I called the head of HR, and she's, you know, she told me, hey, you know, we're going to reorganize, and we're looking for someone, you know, and you should come back and interview for the job. So I'm like, okay. So I flew back. It was right before Macworld. And
Sorry,
I never
where were you flying from?
Scotland.
Oh, the Isle of Scotland.
I'm up in Scotland.
Okay,
yeah,
got it.
yeah. No, I'm hanging around in
You're
northern
still there.
Scotland. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. You know, I mean, I had no place to be. Right.
Right.
It's Christmas. Right.
Okay.
So you know, this, you know, it gets into early January, and they go, you know, you need to come back. I'm like, okay, I'll come back. So you know, I flew back from London, and you know, they start recruiting me to come and run product development. So kind of what was going on was Next was being acquired, and the whole Next team. That was going to close in early February. They'd had McKinsey in there for 6 months, I think, looking to reorganize the company, all right? Because it was divisionalized at the time, so it had 5 major divisions. Low end, high end, portables, servers, and something else I don't remember. Right? The company was in shambles, absolute shambles, and you know, Gil Gil had just been appointed the CEO some months before. Fred Anderson had been hired as CFO from ADP, and you know, there was all these division managers and stuff that were running the place, and it was chaos. So McKinsey's proposal was to restructure it functionally, right? Collapse all the divisions, make it, you know, singular functions: hardware engineering, software engineering, marketing. You know, more like a traditional, smaller company. Because I think what had happened is Apple had really grown. They divisionalized, but the reality is the business wasn't strong enough to support the divisionalization. Everyone was doing this. You know, they were duplicating everything. Yeah. Same boot ROMs. I mean, you know, duplicate boot ROMs in each group, and you know, duplicate every chip development. I mean, it was crazy. So I went in and I met with, you know, with some of the people there. I met with you know, the HR multiple times, and you know, and again, I came back to that lesson. You know, I mean, you know, I talked to some of my friends and they go, "You crazy? I mean, Apple's going out of business." Because I mean, the common wisdom at the time was Apple was going to go out of business. Right? It was going to go bankrupt. It was done. Right? And Fred was doing Herculean efforts to save the company, but that likely it was going to go out.
I remember the quarter before he came back, before Steve returned, they had lost.
Well, Steve isn't back yet.
No, but before he came back, I think it was $740 million in the preceding quarter, so that they had like 1 quarter left.
No, we had 1 quarter left when
I think.
got there. Yeah, I think the company's valuation was like $2 billion when I got there. I mean, it's $1 trillion today.
Yeah.
It was $2 billion, right? And it was out of money, and it was a quarter away from bankruptcy, basically. It was in terrible, terrible shape. And all my friends go, that's crazy, it doesn't make any sense. At the same time, I was interviewing at a couple other places like Juniper Networks to go run engineering there. They were just kind of getting started at the time. And a couple other places. But I went to Macworld in January, and I'm like, wow, there's girls here, right? I mean, I'm used to going to supercomputer conferences, right? and I'm like, this is really interesting. This personal computer stuff might, because I'd always been kind of on the workstation side of things. This personal computer stuff might actually be pretty interesting. But the lesson I'd learned from Rich Lowenthal and his Stratacom experience kind of like really resonated in my head is that if you could turn Apple around, it had an incredibly loyal customer base. It had a large installed base. It had a lot of things really going for it, and it just needed to be like dramatically cleaned up. I mean, this wasn't going to be a minor, we'll fix a couple things. This was going to be a reset on the company. But you had an awful lot of structure in place that allowed you room. Now, I didn't know how close to bankruptcy we were, to be honest. I figured I had a year and a half, to kind of get stuff sorted out. I didn't realize like in 3 months we were going to be out of business. All right. So, so I thought about it, and I met Gil once before I took the job. What the hell, right? I mean, there's no downside. If we pull this off, it'll be the miracle of miracles.
Did you have confidence in Gil to lead the turnaround?
No, I didn't know Gil at all.
Okay.
And
but you still joined?
Yeah, because I figured, this was all going to get worked out.
There's
somehow.
enough good people here.
There's enough good people, we'll figure all this out.
Okay.
And they were getting rid of all the division managers.
Right.
Right, and it was going to be me. Avi was going to be running software, although they had the woman from IBM at the time also involved in running software. But I figured she'd move into a strategy senior position, and Avi would actually do the day-to-day work. And so I knew I could work with Avi. I liked Fred a lot. Garino DeLuca at the time was head of marketing, and Garino was a really good guy. And I could work with him. I felt like I could work with him, and I talked to him about maybe bringing Phil back, right, to help, to run product marketing, because I needed a partner in product marketing. So the pieces were all there. It just needed to get blown up and rebuilt. So, I said, okay, I'll do it, right? And so I showed up at Apple.
And I'm sorry, this is before Jobs. Any inkling that Jobs?
No. I talked to him. He wasn't going. He wasn't. I mean, he was an advisor.
He was
right?
affirmatively not coming back.
Not coming back.
Oh.
Yeah, not
Okay.
coming back. And that bullshit that
Wow.
Ellison spun at his eulogy, at his funeral and stuff was nonsense. I mean,
I wasn't there.
yeah, but basically, I mean, Larry's been quoted as saying, no, Steve had this strategy of how he was going to do this, and he was going to get back to take over the company.
Oh.
That is certainly not what I saw. Now, it may be that Steve kept it secret from me. Anything's possible, but we were pretty close at the time, right? And I know Lorraine didn't want him to go back, right? Because it meant he would disappear, all right? So.
Right, and a lot of stress too.
A lot of
probably.
stress, so Steve was just an advisor. Woz was an advisor. Woz was hanging around, right? And I mean, they had that disastrous Macworld. I mean, I went to the Macworld and it was great because there was lots of women, but the keynote was like the worst thing I've ever seen. It ran. Oh, you should go look it up.
Who was it?
It was Gil running it.
Oh,
but,
Gil.
But it ran for an hour over.
Oh.
They had all kinds of Apple masters, Muhammad Ali or whatever stand up, and I mean it had nothing to do with what the business was. It was silly. The whole thing was silly, right? But the big high note was Steve and Woz got on stage with Gil, and that was a really big deal, right? And probably the first time they'd been together in a long time. So I said, yes, I'll do it, right? And so I showed up, I think it was February 3rd of 97. Interestingly enough, the next Apple deal closed the same day. So I was checking in and I ran into Nancy Heinen, who was chief legal counsel of Apple at the time, in the parking lot or at the check-in desk. at City Tower or whatever it was called, City Center. And she says, yeah, we're closing the deal today. I'm like, cool. So basically, Avi and I started. She wasn't joining at the time. She was the next chief legal counsel. She was going to wind down next, and get everything done. So Avi and I started the same day, and we went to. They kept me in particular hidden for 3 days, because I was going to replace like 5 division managers, right? Because we were going to collapse all these divisions, right? So I mean, there's a lot of people that were going to go away. And they did, right? And fortunately, I didn't actually have to fire them because, I mean, they didn't work for me. So, HR took care of it.
It's not really fair to ask the new guy to do that.
Yeah, but it wouldn't have surprised me if they had. Right? So I hid out for 3 days,
Yeah.
and then they announced they were doing this major restructuring, and that I was going to be running hardware. The software was kind of divvied up between Ellen Hancock and Avi. Was it Ellen Hancock? I think Ellen Hancock and Avi, and various other groups and stuff, and so we went to the first executive staff meeting, and I listened to what was going on, and I look at Avi and I'm like, oh my God, what did we get ourselves into? I mean, this is a disaster.
What? Anything specific?
I mean, everything.
Yeah.
It's like nobody's running the place. It's chaos in the exec staff meeting. The ideas everyone has is nuts. Fred's doing the best he can to keep the company financially solvent, but we're about to go bankrupt. I had, from the outside in the interview process, you would never have known how bad it was. It was so awful. It was unbelievable. Fred is part of the hero of this story, because he pulled off a miracle, buying the time for us to turn that company around. In any case, the marching orders were, let's whack the company in half, and Avi and I set out to cut engineering in half, basically, and it took a couple of iterations to get there, but we got there. We canceled lots of projects, and most of the projects have been actually canceled before Steve came back, because Steve didn't actually come back. I mean, history's been rewritten a bit, but Steve didn't come back until like after 4th of July, or actually maybe it was probably after 4th of July. I forget, whenever Gil got fired that year. I mean, that's when Steve came back, right? And then Fred was actually interim. Nobody remembers that at all. But Steve didn't come back. He was just advising. Fred stepped into the interim CEO position for quite a few months. We interviewed a dozen people to be CEO, and Steve didn't like any of them. All right, and
what is Steve's role? Is he chairman?
No, he's an advisor. No, he's just an advisor.
Oh, okay.
All right?
But his word is enough.
So Ed Woolard and Fred, Ed Woolard was chairman of the board, right? And Ed fired Emilio, right? And worked with Fred on managing the company, basically. And Fred was interim CEO. And Steve agreed to be like full-time advisor. Right. So he went from a part-time advisor, to occasionally showing up to whatever, to a full-time advisor. So now Steve's sort of settling into the saddle of running things, although Fred's actually at the helm. Right. And so step one is, let's find a new CEO. Right. So we start the process of interviewing people to be CEO of the company. In parallel, we continue the process of downsizing the company and fine-tuning or continuing to downsize the product roadmap. And it was about this time where I killed the high-end Mac. So I'd already killed the low-end stuff. The performance stuff I killed right out of the chute because it was terrible. It was done in Singapore. There's a big group in Singapore. I flushed that group.
What was bad about it?
It was unreliable. It was crappy product. It was everybody hated it. It failed continually in the field. I mean, the failure rate was enormous. It was just a bad experience, and it was poor quality. I mean, it was bad. It was a bad product, like on every dimension. Yeah. So we killed that. I shut down that whole division in Singapore. So that's, I had to whack out, 1,500 people. I had to whack out, 700+ people, right? I mean, it was really painful, right? So we took out that. I had a big group in France that was doing address books and other stuff. I don't know all the things they were doing, and it was in Paris, and I loved going to Paris, but it just wasn't. So they were gone, and We had a printer division, which was I mean, you know, Apple kind of was a very early success in printers, but it lost its way. Was the first ones to do digital cameras, but never really made a success of that. So they had this big printer division. There was, you know, $1 billion in inventory. It was $1 billion business, $1 billion in inventory, sitting out in Sacramento in a warehouse. I mean, it looked like Raiders of the Lost Ark. You know that scene where, you know, that warehouse scene?
Why did they build up so much inventory?
Who knows? It was mismanagement.
Wow.
Right? But you know, it was an enormous amount of inventory. And so, you know, I shut down the whole printer division, because it wasn't you know, the core focus.
It wasn't carrying its weight.
It wasn't carrying its weight. It wasn't the core focus. So.
Right. Is this the time that I think Steve announced this?
That was a little bit later.
The 2x2.
Yeah, we figured that out later.
Okay,
Yeah.
but it's ratifying what you're doing now.
We're heading that way.
Yeah.
We haven't gotten there yet, but we're
Okay.
heading that way.
Got it.
Right. And when Steve comes back, we formalize it that way.
Okay.
Right. But I already jettisoned a whole bunch of stuff before he came back.
Yeah.
Right. And the four quadrants, I mean, that had the iMac in it, right? And the iMac hadn't really been started yet. I was working on I forget what it was called, but it was the desktop one based on PowerPC. I forget the name of the product, but it was a really nice product. It was a slab product. I killed the high-end tower product after Steve came back because it was never going to get finished. It just the teams could never deliver the product. I mean, I looked at it and, you know, there's graphics chips that were huge and they were never going to get those right. And I mean, it was just bad all the way around.
So when you assess, this would be really useful for people to know, when you assess the state of a project like you're doing now multiple times across a company, what are some of the red flags that you look for?
Well, so I look at the team first, and how capable is the team, and kind of what's the history of the development process so far. I look at, you know, the bug rate, fix find rates, right? You know, how many turns of silicon have they done? Right? How much simulation have they done, and, you know, what does the simulations look like? You know, what process have they followed to do it? You know, how long's the product been in development? I mean, a good example was the 20th anniversary Mac. This was Gil's pet project. It had been going for 3+ years, right? And I'm like, we should kill this product. And Gil goes, no, right? And I get told by someone else that, you know, career limiting move if you kill Gil's pet project, right? So we shipped it. By the time we shipped it, a reasonable number of the parts inside the 20th anniversary Mac were obsolete. Right, and no longer, or about to become no longer in manufacturing. So we had to do lifetime buys on all the parts that were about to go out of production. Right, which, I mean, that says you got a bad product. Aside from the fact that you know, it was expensive and hard to build, and I mean, there's a whole list of other things. So that only got killed after Gil left and I could kill it, right? Because it was a stupid product. It was really a stupid product.
There was essentially a laptop motherboard, I think, flipped up.
No, it was a whole new thing from scratch.
Oh,
and,
was it?
You know, yeah, and it had this big display. It was an education product, right? That wasn't it. It was a different product. No, it was. You're right, and it had
a Bose sound system.
It had Bose sound system with it. Yeah,
like
you're right. I'm confusing that with the
a
education.
big subwoofer, I think.
Yep. That was it. Yeah,
Right.
It was terrible. It was terrible. So in any case, we killed lots of products.
Yeah.
You know, Steve came back. We started refining what products we're doing. I mean, he was advising at this point. Started refining it. We kill the high-end Mac. And through this, Fred is going, wait a minute, we don't have an entry product anymore, because I'd killed Performa. Right? And that was the entry product. And Fred keeps going, we don't have an entry product. And we start working on a network computer, right? Because Ellison was big into the network computer, and him and Steve were best friends. And
that was the era.
That was the era of network computers.
Yes.
So, you know, we have to do a network computer. So we start building this network computer.
Yeah.
And I keep going, you know, I don't, you know, the next machine with no hard drive didn't work out well. This isn't going to work well because it doesn't have the, you know, we talked about balance before. The networks aren't fast enough yet to have the kind of balance you need. And this isn't going to work well. But Steve kept pushing forward with it, and Fred kept going, wait a minute, we need an entry Mac. So finally, we had sort of a knockdown, drag out one day, and we decide that we're going to switch the network computer to becoming the iMac, and we grow the enclosure a little bit, and we stick a hard drive in it. right? It had the motherboard that came from the from the other desktop product. We basically just took that and put it inside of it, all right? And did a fast track, 11-month, 12-month. I mean, normal product development at Apple took 3 years. And I'm like, we got to get to 1 year cycles.
Now, it was very key towards the introduction of the internet and the web, was it not? It's like I seem to remember the iMac. This is the
round sort of gumdrop
in the
one.
pretty colors.
Pretty colors, right?
Yeah. I mean, wasn't it rip?
It was
mix,
hugely successful.
Rip, mix, burn. The idea
That was
that,
later, but yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
But I mean, it was.
Rip, mix, burn was actually around the tower initially.
Oh, okay.
But we'll get to that.
But the iMac was basically I is internet.
Yeah,
Right.
right.
And this is how everyone. This is how you're going to get on the internet.
Right.
To novices.
Yeah.
Novice
This was kind of, this product was the one that basically put Apple back on the map. Right. I mean, before that, we had our desktop. It was successful. It was a great product, and it was G3 desktop, right? It was the slab. It was a very successful product, and but it went to Mac aficionados, right? It went to the Mac, installed base already, right? It wasn't going to get any new customers, right? And the PC was going gangbusters at the time, right? So in any case, so we finally convinced Steve we switch the NC to an iMac. Johnny makes the enclosure a little bit bigger. We stick a drive inside. We put a slot load CD in the front of it, and I'm going to get back to the slot load in a minute. And I'm like, we're going to do this product in a year. It was probably like 14 months, but our goal is to get it done in a year, and everyone goes, that's impossible. Right? And I said, no, we're going to redo all of our processes at the same time, and we started building out, sort of Apple new product development process at the same time that we're doing this product. It was kind of a skunk works.
Were these from your own past experience?
Yeah.
You developed these processes?
Yeah, absolutely. Right.
Wow.
I brought in people to do the processes. It's still the processes they basically use today. But I brought people in to help with the process and stuff. We hired a few people, some people from Firepower, some people from Next who'd been there, at Next. And
is it about a project management focus?
It's all of it. It's all of it. It's about concurrent engineering, and it's product. It's mild. It's a multi-stage process with gates and milestones and checklists and interdisciplinary. So like. We shipped a display about the time, like right after I got there, we shipped this display, LG display. And it starts having epidemic failure in the field, right? And I'm like, oh my God, we got 50% failure rate. This is a crisis. So I'm like, epidemic, get LG, they got to replace all this stuff. I mean, we got to move quickly. And the lawyers kind of go, very sheepishly go, well, the problem is we haven't finished our agreement yet. And my eyes get about that big, right? And I go, what do you mean you finished the agreement? Well, we just didn't get around to it. And I'm like, you can't ship a product till you have the agreements done. So I mean, that's one of the part of the development process, right? You get your legal shit done before you ship the product. You get your patents done. I mean, it's, you get design for manufacturing in at the very beginning. Right, so you start off with the manufacturing team in the front. You don't just throw something over the wall to them, right? So it's very cross-functional, very disciplinary, interdisciplinary. We got that. So I used the iMac as kind of the pipe cleaner, right? To clean out the pipe and to institute all new processes around how we're going to do stuff at Apple. So I mean, it was 14, 16 months for the iMac total from really start to finish. But
who came up with the translucent, transparent?
Johnny did.
Concept?
That was a Johnny thing.
What was the rationale behind that? Any idea? It's pretty unusual.
Yeah, I mean, what was inside was cool looking.
Okay.
Right? I mean, it was cool.
I mean, who does that? No one else did that.
No, but Johnny's very creative.
It's great.
Johnny's, so the ID team was working for me at the time. For the first four or five years that Johnny worked for me. Right. And he had just gotten promoted when I got there. So the guy who'd been running ID had just quit. And about the time Steve came back, Johnny's quitting, and I'm like, I talk him out of quitting, and then Steve helps talk him out of quitting, and I mean, it was a very volatile time. I mean, because you just laid off 500-600 people, 100 or 200 had quit. This is just on my side. Avi did the same thing on the other side. right? So dramatic downsize of the company. Like whole division's gone, right? I mean, server division gone, right? Low-end division gone, right? And we pulled all of it into a very functional team. So there was a central boot ROM team, right? And it's interesting, still working, sort of on the chirp, follow on from the chirp stuff. And we had a notebook team, and we had a high-end desktop team, and then eventually, the iMac team, low-end team, and we centralized sort of, the technology team. So there was a hard drive team, there was a display team, there was an audio team, there was a power supply team, there was, all the different sort of core technologies, networking team, et cetera, those all got pulled together into core technology groups. Right. And
so during a project, you have people from each of these
yeah,
teams.
you're pulling cross-functionally across all the teams contributing to the project.
Right.
So and we use the iMac as kind of the first proof of concept
to test your new process.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And so I mean, people just worked their hearts out to get that first iMac out. The ID team, I mean, they were in southern Korea. The thing was built in Korea. And because LG was in Korea, right? So they were in Kumi or something, which is, I never took the train. I took a helicopter when I went, the one time I went down there. But normally everyone else took a train down, right? And it's a long train ride, and it's cold down there, and the hotels are not nice. But, I mean, the first iMacs for the launch, when we built 3 of them for the launch or whatever, I mean, the ID guys were sitting in bathtubs, hand adjusting the enclosures and stuff. I mean, these things were handcrafted. Yeah. But it was good because it drove a lot of technology. So we got rid of ADB. I picked USB to switch to because I mean, ADB was just crap at the time, right?
Well, tell us about USB now. That's a huge decision.
It was a huge decision. Yeah.
What made you choose that?
Well, I mean, it was clearly the new standard, right? It had the performance we needed. There were not peripherals out yet, right? But they were going to come eventually. I mean, 1 million PCs had shipped with USB. No one used it. Right.
Are computers still shipping with serial and parallel ports at this?
Yeah,
at this
they
time?
all had serial and parallel ports,
Okay.
and they had floppy drives.
Right. Okay.
Right. And I mean, we got rid of all that, right? And so I looked at USB, and USB was a good technology, and Intel done a good job on it, and I knew some of the guys who'd done it. I'd worked with one at HP before, so I had a connection into the team.
Was there a competing standard that was?
We had FireWire, but that was a higher end thing.
Yeah.
Right. And that was expensive and really meant for high end cameras and video cameras and stuff. So it was too high end for a low end product. This had to be a cost effective product. So FireWire wouldn't work for that. And I needed a basic bus to talk to like lots of peripherals, right? And FireWire wasn't that.
So one of the things that you said in an interview, and which I brought up a while ago too, was that Apple is, when you came back and Steve came back, was very much concerned with ecosystem thinking.
That's me, yeah.
Oh, that's you. Yeah.
That's me.
That's you. So tell us, because you're talking about peripherals and them all plugging into something central, it seems like a good time to talk about that maybe. Can you talk a bit about that?
Well, yeah, I mean, you can't do everything yourself, right? And so you need to build an ecosystem. Right, and so there's 2 ways to do it. You can go through a standards committee, IEEE, blah blah blah, and build a standard, and then try to get everyone to adopt it. And I mean, it takes forever. And that's basically what we were doing at HP with HPPA and the cross-functional architectural committees and stuff. Or you can grab a technology that's almost ready, right, and just go make it happen. Right, and if you can move quickly enough on the technology, that can become the standard. And it was clear to me that USB had that potential. It was very clear. I mean, Intel was behind us; they were investing a lot in it. There was a lot of machines shipping with it. The PC, the printer industry and all those guys hadn't come around yet, but they were going to come around eventually. It was obvious, right?
And its purpose was to replace the kind of unwieldy parallel.
Yeah, we had parallel ports and serial ports, and you had
and just come up with literally something more universal,
just something plug and play, right? And universal. So it actually led to a couple things. So I decided we're going to use USB. I sold it to Steve. He said fine. Steve was, usually trusted me around technology decisions. Right? Not always, but usually trusted me on it. And so, I picked USB. We did a we got rid. I said we're getting rid of the floppy, and that caused a big debate. But everyone came around.
That was viewed
That was huge.
as shot across the bow.
No, it was huge.
Really, in the whole industry.
Yeah. And we did the CD.
I think it was Steve that said, "Well, when was the last time you used a floppy?"
Yeah, right. I mean,
And people kind of,
yeah,
I
exactly.
think you're right.
Right. So
It was the time.
We switched that.
Yeah.
But we needed to do we needed to do a mouse. We needed to do a keyboard. I needed printers. Right. Now I had the advantage of I was just shutting down $1 billion printer business. Right. And it's interesting because Wall Street never gave us credit for this, but I shut down $1 billion printer business, and our computer business never missed a beat. So that $1 billion of revenue got recreated on the computer side because we had good products, right? For first time in a while. Right. And so I called up Epson, I called up HP, and I went, dudes, I got $1 billion printer business. Anyone want it? And they both went. I called up all the printer guys, but HP and Epson really jumped on it. And I said, I need USB printers, and here's what I need them to be. And both HP and Epson jumped on it. Epson actually built products that looked like the iMac, right? Which was kind of cool, right? Remember they had the printers that kind of had the same colors and stuff, and matchy. VJ. This is when I first met VJ at HP, who was running the printer division.
I don't know him.
Yeah, he ran the printer division at the time, or he was the number 2 guy at the printer division. VJ goes, sign us up, and so we did, so we did these deals. So we actually had the first USB printers, right, on the market to go along with the iMac. And we worked with Harman Kardon to do audio, right? Steve almost fired me over that.
Fired you?
Yes.
Oh, why was that?
Because I took Johnny and his team and I had them do the ID for Harman Kardon, because Harman Kardon's IDs were terrible. And I wanted something to go with the iMac that was going to be, really cool looking.
Yeah,
right?
didn't bring the product down.
Yeah. So I had Johnny and his team design something and gave the design basically to Harman Kardon. Steve went crazy and almost fired me for that. So we built a multi-billion-dollar ecosystem around the iMac of peripherals.
What happened to that $1 billion in inventory of printers? Did you?
Oh, it got blown. I mean, Tim Cook took care of it at some point, right?
Sold it at a.
Yeah, it got sold off or whatever. Yeah,
okay.
I don't know, but
right.
That was when Tim first came in. That was one of his first things was to clean up a lot of that inventory shit, and so it got gotten rid of, right? And
got to send to a farm upstate or something.
Who knows? Buried in the bay someplace. I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean,
right.
Bring in a front loader. I don't know. I don't want to know.
Okay.
But in any case, so yeah, I mean, it's a really big deal. So we did the launch, that first iMac launch, and we're in rehearsals for the iMac launch, and I'm in meeting with the CEO of, I think it was Quanta, Barry Lamb, and the phone or Steve's admin comes in and goes, the phone's ringing, I'm busy in a meeting, right? And Steve's admin comes in and Steve wants to talk to her. I pick up the phone and there's this insane person on the other end of the phone yelling at me, and I'm like, what's going on, right? And Steve's just screaming at me and then slams the phone down. And I'm like, WTF? I mean, what's that about, right? And then 2.5 seconds later, Phil Schiller calls me. He goes, you better get down here quick. Steve's having a meltdown. So I go running down to I think we were in the De Anza auditorium. And Steve goes, what's this? And I'm like, that's the slot load. I mean, that's the CD ROM drive. He goes, but what's this tray that comes out? I'm like, that's how they work, right? I mean, that's what all computers have. He goes, well, I want it to be like my car where you just, you have slot load. I'm like, well, they don't make those. All right. He goes, well, this destroys the product, right? And so the next couple of days I talk him down off the cliff because it was impossible, right? They were just coming out with some slot loads, but they were in the full-size form factor. We were using the product that came out in portables, right? And the tray loads out of portables. So he calmed down. We did the launch. It was a home run. I mean, if you go watch that launch, it was great, right? The iMac launch, and
That was in Cupertino?
That was at De Anza Auditorium, and I think it was, I'm sure it was De Anza. And it was a great launch, and it was a great product, and the iMac really took off, and that's what turned Apple around, that product. And so
I remember just on a personal level when it came out, I thought, I kind of went, finally.
Yeah.
There's some, because I had wanted to buy Macs. It's not about me, but I wanted to buy Macs for my mom and dad. And the product space was so confusing. I didn't know what to buy.
You didn't know what to buy. No one knew what to buy.
There was a Centris, a Performa.
Yeah, it was terrible.
There was another model. You just had no way, and all these weird numbers.
Yeah. So as soon as we were kind of in the midst of the development of the iMac, we had sort of addressed that problem organically by killing a lot of stuff. But then Steve really formalized from a marketing point of view. Okay, we have our 2x2. And when we started working on iBook, and we'd already been doing PowerBook and PowerMac, and we started doing iMac, and then we started the iBook, the toilet seat one, and which is a really special product and really an important product.
Tell us about that.
Yeah, we'll get to that in a second.
Okay.
But so that's when we really formalized the 2x2 product matrix and started thinking about the product line that way and making it simple for everyone to buy stuff.
How powerful was that, both internally and for your customers?
Enormously, because you walk into a store, you knew exactly what to buy. Right now, it's a little bit of a marketing gimmick, right? Because in each quadrant we had sort of entry level, medium, and high end, right? Because you could buy configurations of each. So from a product development point of view, we actually had a lot more work to do. But any particular point in time, I had 30, 35 projects going, right? Displays, keyboards, mice, multiple versions of each. I had 3 generations. I had the last generation, the current generation, the next generation of every product, right? That was sort of in the queue, right? So we were really busy as an engineering team, and we bottomed out at about 750 people. We grew back up to 1,400 during the next couple of years, and as the company got more successful. And the iMac was a great product. I mean, it was the first generation. We just leveraged the G3 desktop board and put that in, and it came with a separate module. So LG built the display in Korea, and then they got shipped to Singapore, and in Singapore, we did the motherboard at the Apple factory, and that got then, or maybe they went to Seoul, and the motherboard got shipped in its enclosure from Singapore, and they got integrated together there. Then they got shipped to the U.S. Some combination like that. But we leveraged a lot. I mean, the one thing that was crappy about it was the mouse. That round mouse was terrible.
Yes.
Yeah, that was a bad product, right? And that was industrial design sort of trumping
human factors.
Human factors, exactly. That's a nice way to put it. And we had several examples of that over the years. But that product is really the one that turned the company around, right? And got us going again and really getting back to high volume. And look, at the end of the day, Fred deserves a lot of credit because he's the one who kept going. We need to have an entry-level product. We need to have a low-end product. And that product took off in education. It took off in the consumer space. And all of a sudden, our market share in consumer space, which had dropped below 2%, was heading back up to 8% kind of range, right? So it was not in the overall PC business. We were still at 2%. But in the consumer space, it made a really big difference. It was a great product. People loved it. And, we started the process of turning it. We did the next generation version where the board was integrated directly into it. It was a new board designed specifically for that product, and it was optimized and cost reduced, and we made it much easier to manufacture. We went to different colors and patterns, and and then in parallel, we started working with the iBook, which would be kind of the sister product for the iMac, right? And the big thing there was, now that we're getting heavy into education and everything, we wanted to add networking that could be used in education. And the problem is schools and homes, but particularly, homes are hard to rewire and schools are impossible to rewire because of asbestos. A lot of the schools were old, had a lot of asbestos, so you can't go digging in the walls. So we spent a lot of time looking at power line, at wireless, at phone line, all the different kinds of networking. We evaluated them all. And the conclusion we came to was wireless was the way to go. And there was several choices, right? And Intel was doing home RF, which was sort of the sort of more popular standard at the time. I mean, no one shipped it yet, but it had a lot of momentum going behind it. and the other one was Wi-Fi, which was mostly used for industrial control at the time.